We all know city life in Victorian Britain was rough. Families crammed into 1 or 2 rooms, terrible buildings, no proper toilets, the works. At least they had a roof over their heads, even if everything else was pretty grim. But what about everyone else? What about the people working out in the countryside? Their story gets forgotten a lot, so let's talk about what life was actually like for them. Before the story, if these help you sleep, like or subscribe would be cool. Also, drop where you're listening from and the time. I check the comments and it's crazy seeing people from like Australia and Norway on the same video. Tonight, we're heading to rural England in the 1850s. But hold up, get comfortable first. I mean it. Fix your pillows, grab that blanket. This one's worth settling in for. Your eyes open to darkness, complete suffocating darkness. For a moment, you forget where you are, but then the familiar smell hits you, that musty, earthy scent that never leaves this place. The thatch above you is oozing moisture through the wooden rafters, droplets occasionally falling on your face as you lie there on your sack of chaff. "James," a voice whispers in the darkness. Your wife, Mary, already awake beside you. The baby's coughing again. You don't need light to know what time it is, maybe 4 a.m. The roosters haven't started yet, but your body knows the rhythm after years of farm labour. You've got to be at the fields by first light or risk losing your day's wage. And in February 1853, in rural Buckinghamshire, a missed day's work means your family might not eat. You push yourself up from the sack filled with oat chaff that serves as your mattress. The material crinkles beneath you, years of use having compacted it into a lumpy, uneven surface. But it's better than the bare floor. 9 people sleep in this one upstairs room. You, Mary, the infant between you, and 6 more children crammed onto another chaff sack nearby. The boys and girls together, no privacy, no separation. The eldest girl just turned 12, the eldest boy almost 11. They'll be working the fields with you soon enough if they survive. Not like your memory foam mattress right now, is it? I know, sounds fake, but wait till you hear about their bathroom situation. Swinging your legs over the edge, your bare feet touch the rough wooden floor. You can't fully stand up. The rafters are too low except in the very centre of the room. The thatch above, decades old and rarely repaired, is begrimed with smoke and dust and replete with vermin, as one Victorian journalist would describe it. Rats and mice live in it, along with spiders, though as the saying went, there are no cobwebs, for the spider only spreads his net where flies are likely to be caught. In your case, there's so little food in the house that even the spiders go hungry. The room's sole window, a tiny opening in the sloped roof, provides no light at this hour. There's hardly any ventilation, just a small aperture that barely qualifies as a window. In winter, you stuff it with rags to keep out the worst of the cold, sacrificing fresh air for a bit of warmth. Speaking of cold, it's absolutely freezing. February in England is brutal, and there's no heat in this sleeping room. The temperature inside isn't much warmer than outside. You shiver as you reach for the clothes you were wearing yesterday, which now serve as part of the covering for your children. This is common practice. Parents' day clothes often become the children's night covers, a necessity when you only have 2 actual blankets in the household. And those are on your bed, the parental bed, because at least you need to stay healthy enough to work. You fumble in the darkness, stepping carefully around the children's sleeping forms. They're all there, squeezed together for warmth. William, Emma, little George, Sarah, Thomas, and baby Elizabeth, now coughing in Mary's arms. They sleep in their clothes, what few they have. Most don't own shoes, just walking barefoot or with rags tied around their feet. Well, you can't remember when. The nearest pump is half a mile away, and who has time to haul water for bathing when every hour is spent trying to survive? Careful on those steps, I should mention. The stairs to your sleeping quarters are basically a glorified ladder, a few rickety wooden steps leading through what's essentially a hatchway in the ceiling of the room below. They're greasy from years of hands and feet, and more than one person has taken a nasty fall. You make your way down in darkness, feeling each step with your toes before committing your weight. One wrong move and you could break a leg, and a broken leg means no work, which means no food, which means, well, let's not think about that just yet. The downstairs is just 2 rooms, a main living room that serves as kitchen, dining area and workplace, and a small back kitchen with a copper pot for washing. The cottage is tiny, maybe 15 feet long and 13 feet wide. The sandstone walls are sunk at different points and seem bedewed with cold sweat, as one visitor described similar dwellings. They're crumbling to decay, the whole structure twisting and distorting over time until it barely resembles something built by human hands. You bend down at the fireplace where a few embers still glow from last night. Precious heat. You carefully add some sticks your children gathered yesterday. Being caught taking wood from the landowner's property could mean a punishment or fine you can't afford. The kindling catches, and a small flame gives the first light to the room, casting shadows on the 3 old chairs, one missing its back, a small rickety table, and a stool or 2 that make up your entire furniture. By firelight you can now see the uneven brick floor, damp from ground moisture that constantly seeps up. The low ceiling and walls are blackened from years of smoke. There's no proper chimney, just an opening above the fireplace that does a mediocre job of directing smoke outward instead of into the room. Still, the cottage fills with a haze on cold days when the fire must burn longer. "Have we any bread left?" Mary asks, coming down the steps with the baby, who continues to cough. You both know the answer. The last loaf was finished yesterday, and the potatoes are running low. It's still weeks before the spring vegetables will be ready. You check the small shelf where food is kept. There's a bit of salt butter, saved for when you need strength for the heaviest work. There's half a jar of dripping, animal fat saved from the rare occasions when meat passes through the house. And there are potatoes, your staple food, the thing that keeps hunger at arm's length most days. "We've got the last of the bacon," Mary says, reaching up to a hook where a small piece hangs. "It's been there for days, saved for today, Sunday, when you need to face the long walk to church and the judging eyes of the landowner's family. The one day you might get meat." The piece is barely enough for the 2 adults, let alone the children, but it's something. The scent of it cooking will soon fill the cottage, and for a brief moment you'll feel almost human. The fire grows, and Mary puts a pot of water on to boil. The children will wake to potatoes and perhaps a bit of bread if you're lucky enough to get some from the baker, who sometimes gives yesterday's loaves at a discount. Outside, the sky is still pitch black, but your day has begun. In a few hours, you'll walk to the fields where you'll spend 12-14 hours breaking your back for a wage that barely keeps your family alive. You have no guarantee of work tomorrow or the next day. Your labour is at the command of anyone who bids for it, and employment is precarious at best. Yet the fire is warm on your face as you crouch before it. Your family is alive, for now. The cottage may be what one observer called a den indeed at any time, but it's the only thing between you and complete destitution, between you and the workhouse, where families are separated and treated worse than criminals. "The baby's fever seems better today," Mary says, touching Elizabeth's forehead. "A small victory, but you'll take it." Through the single downstairs window, stuffed with rags in places where the glass has broken, you can just make out the faintest lightening of the sky. Another day is beginning in rural Victorian England, a day of labour, hunger, and small dignities carved from overwhelming hardship. The baby coughs again, and you exchange a glance with your wife. You both know what illness can mean in a place like this, how quickly it can spread through a family sleeping in such close quarters, with no proper sanitation, limited clean water, and barely enough food to maintain strength. "She'll be all right," you say, though you have no way of knowing. "Spring is coming." You say it like a prayer, though spring brings its own challenges. Different work, different hardships, but hardships nonetheless. But now, in the cold February pre-dawn, with your family huddled in a cottage that's barely standing, spring feels like the only hope worth clinging to. Wait till you hear about what happens when one of these families gets sick. The cholera outbreaks in these villages absolutely decimated entire communities. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. For now, you stoke the fire as the baby coughs again, and you prepare for another day of uncertainty in the forgotten corners of Victorian England. The first hint of dawn breaks through the ragged window, casting a grey light across the main room of your cottage. The fire has grown, and the small pot of water now steams in the growing light. Mary is moving around the space with practiced efficiency, despite the baby on her hip. Elizabeth's coughs punctuate the quiet morning. Your older children begin to stir upstairs, the wooden beams creaking as they move across the floor. You hear them before you see them, whispering, shifting, then carefully navigating the treacherous steps down to the main room. Emma, your 12-year-old, is first down. Her eyes are already alert, scanning the room to assess what needs to be done. No child in this cottage has the luxury of a slow awakening. Work begins the moment consciousness returns. "Morning, Dar," she says quietly, moving immediately to help her mother. Emma's dress is the same one she's worn all week, frayed at the edges and patched in multiple places. It's too small for her growing frame, the sleeves ending well above her wrists, but there's no money for new clothing. You nod in acknowledgement. Words are often a luxury in the early morning hours when everyone knows their tasks without discussion. William follows, your 10-year-old son. He's small for his age, the result of years of near starvation and hard work. Rural children like him rarely grow to their full potential. Their bodies, constantly fighting against cold and hunger, stay compact, conserving what little energy they can extract from their meagre diets. "Should I check the snares, Dar?" he asks, already reaching for his cap. The boy has been setting rabbit snares since he was 7. It's illegal, of course. Poaching on the landowner's property carries severe penalties, but sometimes the difference between eating and starving is a skinny rabbit caught in the pre-dawn hours. "Careful now," you warn. The gamekeeper has been particularly vigilant lately. 3 weeks ago, a man from the village was caught with a pheasant. He spent a week in jail and lost his position on the farm. The rest of the children emerge one by one. 8-year-old Sarah carrying 4-year-old Thomas, who's still half asleep, and 6-year-old George trailing behind. Only baby Elizabeth remains upstairs, now cradled in Mary's arms as she tends the fire. "Wood's nearly gone," Mary says quietly. It's not an accusation, just a statement of fact. Fuel is always a problem. Coal is too expensive for families like yours. Wood must be gathered, and the landowner restricts what can be taken from his forests. Even fallen branches are considered his property. "We'll gather after church," you reply. Sunday is the one day when work eases slightly, though your family can scarcely afford to take even half a day off. The small cottage is now alive with movement. Emma slices the last potatoes into the pot. William returns empty-handed from checking his snares. No rabbits today. The younger children sit huddled near the fire, warming themselves before the day fully claims them. Mary places the baby in Sarah's capable arms and begins preparing the meagre breakfast. Your stomach growls audibly. Farm labour requires thousands of calories you rarely consume. The constant sensation of hunger is so familiar you barely notice it anymore. It's just the background noise of existence. "Let me tell you something crazy," I interject here. Victorian labourers like you would burn around 4,000 calories a day doing farm work, but most families could only afford about half that in food. Your body was literally consuming itself to keep going. The one saving grace of rural poverty versus urban poverty is that at least you can sometimes supplement your diet. In season, there are berries in the hedgerows, watercress in the streams, and occasionally wild mushrooms in the woods. But in February, nature offers little. The ground is frozen, the bushes bare. Mary carefully divides the potatoes among 7 plates, tiny portions that barely qualify as a meal. The last piece of bacon has been cut into fragments so small they're almost symbolic, a whisper of protein rather than actual sustenance. Your plate gets the largest potato and most of the bacon. Not out of favoritism, but necessity. You need the strength for the hardest physical labour. "Remember when we had the pig last year?" George asks, staring at his plate with undisguised hunger. Everyone remembers. For a brief period, you'd managed to keep a pig, raising it on scraps and whatever it could forage. When slaughtered, it had provided meat for weeks, a rare time of relative plenty. But the cottage has no proper space for livestock, and the small yard is barely enough for a modest vegetable patch. "We'll have another when summer comes," you promise, though you have no idea how you'll manage it. The family eats in near silence, savouring each bite, making the food last as long as possible. Even the smallest children understand instinctively that this food must sustain them for hours. After breakfast, Mary hands you a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Saved from yesterday," she explains. Inside is a crust of bread and a single cold potato, your midday meal for a day of heavy labour. The sky outside is brightening from grey to pale blue. It's time to go. You pull on your boots, cracked leather, worn thin at the soles, but still better than nothing. Your coat is little more than a collection of patches held together by Mary's skilled needlework. "Be home for church," Mary reminds you. Missing Sunday service is not an option. The landowner notices absences, and those who don't appear sufficiently God-fearing might find work opportunities mysteriously drying up. You step outside into the bitter cold of a February morning. The cottage looks even more pitiful from the outside, lopsided with a sagging thatched roof and walls that curve where they should be straight. It sits alongside several similar dwellings, a small cluster of poverty at the edge of the larger estate. The walk to the farm takes 20 minutes across frozen fields. Your breath forms clouds in the air as you trudge along familiar paths. Other labourers emerge from similar cottages, all heading the same direction. There's Jones with his perpetual limp from a threshing accident years ago. There's old Taylor, who must be 60 but still works daily because there's no other option for survival. Or morning, they mumble as paths converge. Extended conversation is a luxury saved for evenings or Sundays. The farm comes into view, a substantial building of solid construction with barns and outbuildings arranged around a central yard. The contrast between these structures and your own dwelling is stark. The farm buildings were built to last, to protect valuable livestock and equipment. Your cottage was thrown together with minimal materials and effort. Oakley Taylor Jones. The foreman's shout cuts through the morning air. Ditch clearing today. Westfield needs drainage before spring planting. Your heart sinks. Ditch digging is among the hardest labour, standing ankle deep in freezing water and mud, swinging a pick and shovel hour after hour. By nightfall, your hands will be raw and bleeding despite calluses built up over years. But you can't show disappointment, can't show weakness. "Yes, sir," you respond alongside the others. "And you there," the foreman points at a young man you don't recognise. "New, are you? From where?" "Aylesbury Way, sir," the young man responds. "Looking for work?" "No guarantee beyond today," the foreman warns. "If the weather turns, we won't need extras." This is the reality of agricultural labour in Victorian England. Employment is precarious at best. You might work for days or weeks, then suddenly find yourself without wages when rain makes field work impossible or when the season changes. The landowner feels no obligation to provide steady employment. The tools are distributed, shovels worn smooth from years of use, picks with handles polished by countless hands before yours. Then you march to the western field where a drainage ditch has silted up over winter. "Get to it then," the foreman orders. "Sixpence for the day's work, if it's done proper." 6 pence for 12 hours of back-breaking labour. It's barely enough to feed your family, certainly not enough for new clothes or medicine when illness strikes, but it's something, and something is better than the empty pockets that come with unemployment. You plunge your shovel into the half-frozen mud, using your foot to drive it deeper. The first cut of many, thousands of movements repeated until your muscles scream and your mind empties of everything except the next shovelful. The day has begun in earnest now, the pale winter sun offering light but little warmth. Around you, the rural landscape of Victorian England stretches in all directions, fields lying fallow for winter, skeletal trees, and in the distance, the landowner's substantial home, where fires burn in every room and no one knows the meaning of true hunger. Meanwhile, back at the cottage, Mary's day has taken shape as well. With you gone, she balances the constant needs of the household against her own income-generating work. Emma, mind the little ones. Sarah, help with the washing. William and George, the water needs fetching. The copper pot in the back kitchen must be filled for washing. Clothes, linens, and eventually bodies, though full baths are rare luxuries saved for the most extreme circumstances. Water must be hauled from the communal pump half a mile away. It's a task that will occupy William and George for over an hour, carrying heavy buckets back and forth several times. Mary's primary income comes from taking in washing from wealthier households and from intricate needlework she does by the light of a single candle after the children are asleep. Her fingers are permanently pricked and calloused from countless hours of detailed stitching. Today she has a pile of mending from the doctor's household, shirts with frayed collars, stockings with holes, handkerchiefs needing monograms. The payment will be small but vital, perhaps a few pennies and some stale bread, or if she's lucky, a bit of cheese or milk for the baby. But before she can begin the fine work, the regular household tasks must be addressed. The single room must be swept, the meagre bedding aired if weather permits, the vegetable patch checked for any winter hardy greens that might supplement dinner. Sarah, the baby's fussing. Take her while I start the washing, Mary instructs. At 8 years old, Sarah is already a capable childminder, having been pressed into service from the moment she could safely hold a younger sibling. The washing is a brutal task in winter. Mary's hands turn red, then white with cold as she scrubs clothing in water that quickly turns icy. There is no relief. The work must be done regardless of comfort or health. Wet laundry must be hung to dry inside, creating a damp atmosphere that only worsens the cottage's already problematic conditions. "Mama, Thomas is coughing now too," Sarah reports, bouncing the baby on her hip while the 4-year-old huddles near the fire. Mary pauses, water dripping from her chapped hands, to look at her son. His cheeks are flushed despite the chill in the air, another illness beginning. It's hardly surprising. The damp conditions, inadequate food and close quarters make disease transmission inevitable. But there's no money for a doctor. No time to lay in bed and recover properly. The best she can offer is willow bark tea if the cough worsens, and perhaps a bit more of her own food portion diverted to the sick children. This is how disease spreads through rural communities, passed from one weakened body to another, with few resources to fight it off. In the 1850s, diseases like tuberculosis, typhoid, and various respiratory infections claimed countless lives, particularly among the youngest and oldest. By mid-morning, Mary has the washing underway and has begun the fine needlework while supervising the children's chores. Emma is peeling the few remaining potatoes for the evening meal, stretching them with a handful of barley to make a thin soup. Mrs. Oakley, a sharp knock at the door interrupts the domestic rhythm. Mary opens it to find Mrs. Simmons, the vicar's wife, standing with a basket over her arm. The woman's expression is a carefully constructed mask of Christian charity overlaid on barely disguised disgust at the conditions before her. "I've brought some things the parish thought might be useful," she announces, stepping just inside the doorway but no further, as if poverty might be contagious. Some old clothes for the children and a bit of broth for the baby. I hear she's unwell. "You're very kind, Mum," Mary responds, accepting the basket with genuine gratitude despite the condescension. Pride has no place when your children are hungry and ill. Mrs. Simmons peers around the cottage, eyes lingering on the damp walls, the sparse furnishings, the children in their patched clothing. "You really must keep things cleaner, Mrs. Oakley," she admonishes. "Disease thrives in filth, and open the window occasionally for fresh air." Mary doesn't explain that opening the window lets in freezing air that could kill a sick baby faster than stale air ever would, doesn't mention that cleanliness requires soap, hot water and time, all luxuries beyond her reach. She simply nods and thanks the woman again. "We expect to see you all at service tomorrow," Mrs. Simmons adds before departing. "The Reverend has prepared a special sermon on the virtues of industry and thrift." After she leaves, Mary examines the basket's contents: a jar of weak broth, likely left over from the vicarage kitchen, some clothes outgrown by parish children, worn but serviceable, and at the bottom, surprisingly, an orange, a rare treasure that will be divided into tiny segments and savoured by each family member. "Look, children," she says, holding up the orange. Their eyes widen at the sight. None of them can remember the last time they tasted such a luxury. "After church tomorrow," she promises, setting it carefully aside. The morning passes in a blur of domestic labour. By noon the washing is hanging to dry, the needlework has progressed, and Mary has managed to make a thin gruel for the younger children's lunch. Mostly water, with a bit of barley and a scraping of dripping for flavour. Out in the field, you continue the punishing work of ditch clearing. Your back burns with the strain of constant bending and lifting. The cold mud has seeped through your boots hours ago, leaving your feet numb and painful. Your lunch, the crust and potato, was consumed in a brief 5-minute break. Around you, other men labour in similar conditions. Occasionally, a cough echoes across the field. Consumption, most likely, the dreaded tuberculosis that claims so many rural lives. Men work through the symptoms until they literally cannot stand, because a day without work is a day without food for their families. The landowner passes by on horseback in the early afternoon, surveying his property. He barely glances at the labourers. You are as much fixtures of the landscape as the trees and hedgerows, merely tools for extracting value from the land. As the winter sun begins its early descent, you drive your shovel into the mud one final time. The ditch is clear now, a channel carved through frozen earth that will direct spring rains away from valuable cropland. Your hands are bleeding despite the calluses, your back in spasm from thousands of repetitive movements. "That'll do," the foreman announces, inspecting the work. He distributes the promised 6pence to each man. "Same time Monday if it doesn't freeze overnight." The money feels insignificant in your palm, a tiny compensation for the day's toll on your body, but it means food tomorrow. It means one more day keeping the workhouse at bay. You trudge home in the gathering dusk, joining the stream of labourers returning to their cottages. The brief winter day is already surrendering to night, and you've been working since before dawn. Ahead lies church tomorrow, a different kind of obligation. Then perhaps, if you're lucky, more work on Monday. This is the rhythm of rural poverty, endless labour punctuated by brief periods of rest that are themselves filled with different kinds of work. As your cottage comes into view, smoke rising from its crooked chimney, you feel the conflicting emotions familiar to every labourer. Relief at returning to the only shelter you have, mixed with the knowledge that this shelter itself is barely adequate against the elements, against disease, against the grinding poverty that defines your existence. Inside, Mary will have stretched the few available ingredients into something resembling a meal. The children will be waiting, hungry and tired from their own day's labour. Baby Elizabeth will still be coughing, perhaps joined now by Thomas. This is rural Victorian England in the 1850s, not the romanticised version from postcards and paintings, but the harsh reality faced by the agricultural working class, a reality of constant labour, persistent hunger, inadequate housing, and the ever-present fear that illness, injury, or unemployment could tip the delicate balance from bare survival into complete destitution. And yet, as you push open the door to your cottage, there is also this, the orange sitting on the shelf, waiting to be shared, a small bright spot of sweetness in an otherwise bitter existence. Sometimes, in the harshest circumstances, these tiny moments of respite become magnified in importance, sustaining the spirit when the body is failing. The door creaks open and your family looks up from their tasks. For a moment, framed in the doorway with the last light of day behind you, you are simply a father returning home. And despite everything, the hunger, the cold, the constant struggle, there is genuine welcome in their eyes. Sunday dawns cold but clear, a rare winter blessing. The cottage stirs earlier than usual. Church is non-negotiable, and preparation takes time when appearances must be maintained despite crushing poverty. Emma helps Sarah with her hair, Mary instructs, while attempting to make Thomas's persistent cough less noticeable with a spoonful of honey water, the last of the honey gifted at Christmas by the miller whose shirts Mary mends. You've been up since before dawn, polishing the family's single pair of decent shoes that will be worn in relay, first by you to church, then passed to Mary for the afternoon service while you stay with the younger children, then worn by Emma and William for evening prayers. The rest will go barefoot or with rags tied around their feet, kept hidden beneath long skirts or trousers. "Will they check our hands again, Dar?" George asks nervously as Mary scrubs his face with icy water. Last Sunday, the vicar's wife had inspected the children's hands and fingernails before allowing them into Sunday school, sending 3 village children home for being insufficiently attentive to cleanliness. "Just keep them in your pockets till you're inside," you advise. The boy's hands are perpetually ingrained with dirt from his chores, hauling water, gathering wood, helping in the small vegetable plot. No amount of scrubbing with the family's sliver of harsh lye soap will remove it entirely. Church attendance is more than religious obligation, it's economic survival. The local landowner, Squire Radley, takes careful note of which tenant families attend services. Those who miss without dire cause often find their lease terms suddenly altered, or their work opportunities diminished. God and landlord are equally powerful forces in your world, and often seem to work in tandem. The squire himself barely acknowledges the existence of labourers like you, except as entries in his account books or problems to be managed. His agent, Mr. Benson, handles the day-to-day interactions, delivering notices of rent increases or eviction with the same bland expression he might use to comment on the weather. By 8 o'clock, the family is as presentable as circumstances allow. The children's clothes have been mended countless times, but they're clean and their hair is combed. Mary has pinned her single good collar to her dress, detachable so it can be washed separately and preserved. You wear your only white shirt, frayed at cuffs and collar, but still dignified with careful pressing. The walk to the village church takes 20 minutes along muddy lanes. Other families emerge from similar cottages, all making the same journey, all dressed in their precarious best. Greetings are exchanged in hushed tones, a shared understanding of the effort required for this weekly display. "Oakley's girl looks peaky," you overhear Mrs. Wright whispering to her husband. "Consumption, I'd wager. That cottage of theirs is nothing but damp and mould." You pretend not to hear, but the comment strikes like a physical blow. Elizabeth's cough has worsened overnight, and Thomas now matches her wheeze for wheeze. The spectre of serious illness is never far from families like yours, where recovery resources are nearly non-existent. St. Michael's Church stands at the village centre, solid stone and certainty against the precarious existence of its parishioners. Built in the 13th century, its permanence mocks the flimsy, temporary nature of labourers' dwellings. Inside, the cold somehow seems even more penetrating than outside, the stone walls radiating winter chill. Seating follows strict social hierarchy. The squire's family occupies the front pew, complete with cushions and foot warmers. Local shopkeepers, the miller, and other moderately prosperous villagers fill the middle rows. Farm labourers and the poorest cottagers stand at the back or sit on backless benches along the sides. The vicar's sermon today, as Mrs. Simmons promised, focuses on industry and thrift. His gaze repeatedly drifts to the labourers section as he expounds on the virtues of hard work and the sins of idleness and discontent. The irony that no one in the parish works harder than those he's implicitly criticising seems lost on him entirely. Let us be grateful for our station, he intones, and not covet that which Providence has seen fit to bestow upon others. Beside you, Mary shifts slightly, the only external sign of her inner thoughts. You've been married long enough to read this small movement, a combination of pain from standing through the service while already exhausted and barely contained frustration at the sermon's disconnection from reality. The children fidget but remain silent. Even the youngest have learned that church behaviour must be impeccable. Thomas stifles his coughs into his sleeve, face reddening with the effort. After the service comes the moment most dreaded by the poorer parishioners, the gauntlet of social interaction in the churchyard. The squire and his family emerge first, nodding vaguely toward the assembled villagers while speaking only to those of similar standing. Mr. Benson, the agent, is more directly engaged. He moves through the crowd, his conversation seeming friendly but often containing veiled warnings or reminders. "Ah, Oakley," he says, approaching your family. "Roof still holding up in that cottage? Noticed it looking rather precarious when I passed yesterday." "Manages well enough, sir," you respond carefully. "Good, good. Wouldn't want to spend money on repairs if it's serviceable." His smile doesn't reach his eyes. "Though I should remind you that next quarter's rent will include the 2-shilling increase we discussed." He moves on before you can respond, leaving Mary's hand gripping your arm tightly. 2 shillings is an impossible increase when every penny is already accounted for in the brutal mathematics of survival. "The Collins family's being turned out," whispers Mrs. Parker as you help Mary negotiate the icy churchyard path. "Behind on rent 3 months. They'll go to the workhouse tomorrow." The workhouse, ultimate fear of every labouring family, the place where destitution leads, where families are separated upon entry, where even children work 14-hour days breaking stones or picking oakum, where many enter but few leave, except in pine boxes to unnamed graves. "We'll need to find more work," Mary murmurs as you walk home, the children running ahead. "I could take in more washing." You nod, though you both know there's little extra work to be found in winter, and Mary's days are already full from dawn to well past dusk. The rent increase hangs over your family like a storm cloud on the horizon. Back at the cottage, the brief respite of Sunday afternoon begins. This is the only time in the week when labour pauses, when families can simply exist together. Even this is a luxury compared to urban workers, who often have no guaranteed day of rest at all. Mary divides the orange from Mrs. Simmons' basket into precise segments, one for each family member. The children watch with solemn anticipation. Such treats are rare enough to be memorable events. "Smallest piece for the baby," Mary says, setting aside a tiny section for Elizabeth. "She can suck the juice." The burst of flavour is almost shocking after months of bland potatoes and bread. For a moment, the single slice of orange transforms the cold cottage into something approaching contentment. Small pleasures take on outsized importance when they're rare. "Tell us about the big house, Sarah requests, savouring her orange segment slowly to make it last. This is a Sunday tradition, stories about the squire's mansion that none of the children have ever entered, except Emma, who occasionally helps with laundry there. Your descriptions, gleaned from glimpses through windows while doing garden work, feed their imaginations and provide a momentary escape. They have a room just for eating, you begin, though they've heard this many times, with a table long enough for 20 people, and another room only for sitting and talking, with chairs soft as clouds and carpets thick as summer grass, and a room just for books, Emma adds, having seen the library during her work, more books than the school and church combined. The children listen, wide-eyed, struggling to imagine such excess of space and possessions when their entire lives are contained within these two small rooms. "And do they have to carry water?" asks George, for whom the daily water hauling is a major chore. "They have pipes that bring water right inside," you explain. "They just turn a handle and clean water pours out, and other pipes take away the dirty water." This technological marvel always elicits gasps. The concept of water appearing without labour seems more magical to your children than any fairy tale. The remainder of Sunday passes quietly. Mary uses the precious daylight hours to mend clothing and work on her paid needlework. You repair a broken chair and check the cottage's structure for new leaks or damage. The children entertain themselves with simple games, marbles made from clay, a battered set of jacks, stories told and retold. As darkness falls, the orange has been completely consumed, even the peel saved to flavour the next batch of barley water. The brief respite ends as preparations for Monday begin. Clothes laid out, tools gathered, food portions planned. Monday arrives with freezing rain that pelts the cottage roof and seeps through the ageing thatch in several places. Strategic placement of pots catches the worst drips, their plinks and plonks creating a dissonant melody throughout the dark morning. "Field work will be called off," Mary says, watching the downpour. "It's a mixed blessing. No wage for the day, but also no standing in freezing mud for 12 hours. The foreman confirms this when you trudge to the farm despite the weather. "Nothing today," he announces to the gathered labourers. "Try again tomorrow if it clears." The men disperse silently, each calculating how this lost day will affect their already precarious finances. Some head to the village to seek odd jobs, splitting wood, cleaning stables, any task that might earn a few pennies. Others return to their cottages to work on crafts that might supplement their income, whittling, basket making, mending tools. You walk to Ashby's mill, 3 miles distant but worth the journey if the miller needs help. The mill operates regardless of weather, and Ashby sometimes needs an extra hand when grain deliveries arrive. "Could use someone for unloading," Ashby confirms when you arrive. "Soaked through and shivering. 6pence for the day. Start now." The work is different but no less gruelling than field labour. Sacks of grain weighing up to 200 pounds must be carried from wagons into the mill's storage area. By midday, your shoulders and back burn with the strain, your wet clothes chafing against skin. Ashby's wife provides a bowl of thin soup at noon, a kindness not all employers would offer. You eat standing in the mill's relative warmth, savouring both the food and the brief respite from rain. "Bad winter for consumption," Ashby comments, watching you eat. "Lost 2 workers already since Christmas. Your family keeping healthy?" "Well enough," you respond automatically, though Thomas and Elizabeth's coughs worry you deeply. "There's a new doctor in Upper Westfield," Ashby mentions. "Young fellow, sometimes takes payment in labour or goods when folks can't manage cash." You nod non-committally, though the information is carefully filed away. Upper Westfield is 6 miles distant, a long journey on foot, but not impossible if a child's condition worsened. The afternoon passes in the rhythm of physical labour: lift, carry, stack, repeat. The rain continues unabated, drumming on the mill roof. You worry about Mary and the children in the leaking cottage, about the garden plot washing away, about tomorrow's work prospects if the weather doesn't improve. By day's end, your muscles tremble with exhaustion, but the sixpence in your pocket provides some consolation. It won't replace a full day's field work, but it will buy a loaf of bread and perhaps a bit of cheese, enough to keep hunger at bay for another day. The walk home in darkness and continuing rain is treacherous. Twice you nearly fall on the muddy path, and your boots are so soaked they squelch with every step. Still, you're luckier than many. At least you found work for the day. The cottage window glows faintly as you approach. Mary has lit a precious candle, something reserved for urgent need. Your pace quickens despite your fatigue. Inside, the scene confirms your fears. Thomas lies on a pallet near the fire, his breathing laboured and face flushed with fever. Mary kneels beside him, her expression tight with worry as she places a damp cloth on his forehead. "Started worsening after midday," she explains quietly. "Elizabeth's cough is worse too, but no fever yet." You place the sixpence in her hand, a silent communication of success in finding work, but also acknowledgement that it's not enough to solve this new crisis. A doctor's visit costs a shilling at minimum, and medicine would be extra. "Mrs. Parker brought willow bark," Mary continues, nodding toward a small bundle of pale strips on the table, "for tea to bring down the fever." The community's informal support network is often the only thing standing between families like yours and complete disaster. Knowledge passes from mother to daughter, which plants reduce fever, which poultices draw infection, which teas ease coughing. Neighbours share what little they have, knowing they may need similar help next week or next month. Emma has taken charge of the younger children, keeping them occupied in the cottage's far corner. At 12, she already shoulders adult responsibilities, her childhood compressed by necessity. William sits mending a basket by candlelight, a skill learned from his grandfather, and one that occasionally earns a few pennies when the finished baskets can be sold. "The Robinsons lost their baby yesterday," Emma says quietly as you hang your wet coat near the fire. "Whooping cough, they're burying her tomorrow. Child mortality is a constant presence in your community. In winter especially, when cold, damp and hunger combine with seasonal illnesses, death visits many cottages. The small churchyard has far too many tiny graves, their stones simple or non-existent depending on what families could afford." "We'll make the willow tea stronger," Mary decides, glancing between Thomas and Elizabeth, "and keep them near the fire tonight." You nod and begin removing your soaked boots, the leather so worn they provide little actual protection. Your feet are white and wrinkled from hours of wetness, the skin between your toes cracking painfully. Mary will rub them with a bit of precious grease before sleep. Not for comfort, but to ensure you can walk to work tomorrow. A labourer who cannot walk cannot earn. Through the evening, the family's attention centres on Thomas. His breathing grows increasingly laboured, each inhalation a visible struggle that raises his small chest and hollows his neck. The willow bark tea is administered hourly, along with honey water when he can swallow. Emma takes charge of serving the evening meal, boiled potatoes and barley made into a thin soup with the bread purchased from your day's wages divided precisely among the family. Mary eats one-handed, the other hand constantly monitoring Thomas's fever. "Should we send for the doctor?" you ask quietly when the younger children are settled for sleep. Mary's hesitation tells everything about the impossible calculations of poverty. A doctor might save Thomas, or might not, but the cost would certainly mean less food for everyone else, perhaps for weeks. These are the brutal arithmetic problems faced daily by families like yours, where there are never good choices, only varying degrees of painful ones. "Let's see if the fever breaks by morning," she finally says. "If not..." The sentence hangs unfinished. You both know what hangs in the balance, not just Thomas's health, but the precarious stability of the entire family. One serious illness, one missed rent payment, one injury preventing work, and the whole structure could collapse. The rain continues through the night, its patter on the thatch now punctuated by Thomas's wheezing and the occasional cough from Elizabeth or the other children. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by the need to tend the fire, check Thomas, and reposition pots catching leaks. This is the reality of survival in rural Victorian England, a constant state of triage addressing each crisis as it arises while knowing another inevitably waits just behind it. There is no getting ahead, only staying afloat for one more day, one more week, one more season. Yet even in these harshest circumstances, there are threads of resilience and community that provide structure and meaning. The knowledge passed between generations about how to stretch food, treat illness, and maintain dignity despite poverty. The informal support networks between cottagers who share what little they have. The small moments of beauty and joy, an orange shared, a story told, a child's laughter that punctuate the hardship. As the night deepens and the cottage grows quiet, save for Thomas's laboured breathing, these interconnected systems of survival continue their work, invisible but essential, holding families and communities together against the relentless pressures of poverty, illness and uncertainty in the forgotten corners of Victorian England. Morning arrives with a momentary blessing. Thomas's fever has broken during the night. He remains weak, his cough still rattling in his chest, but his eyes are clearer when they open, and he asks for water in a scratchy voice. "Thank Providence," Mary murmurs, placing a hand on his forehead to confirm the cooler temperature. The willow bark tea, constant attention, and perhaps simply his young body's resilience have combined to pull him back from the edge that so many children slip over, especially in winter. The rain has stopped, leaving behind a world of mud and standing water. The cottage floor is damp in places where the leaks were too many for the available containers. Mary has been up since well before dawn, wringing out sodden rags and trying to dry the worst patches before the day properly begins. "Field work today?" she asks as you pull on your still damp boots. "If they'll have me," you reply. With Thomas seeming improved, the family's attention returns to the ever-present need for income. A missed day of work yesterday means today's labour is even more essential. Emma will stay home from school to help care for Thomas and the baby. Education, though theoretically available through the church school, is a luxury often sacrificed to more immediate needs. At 12, she's already missed so much schooling that the gaps in her knowledge are likely permanent. She can read simple texts and write her name, which is more than many rural children achieve. Mrs. Wright's youngest has the cough now too, Emma reports as she takes over watching Thomas. And the Carter twins, half the school was empty yesterday. This is how illness travels through rural communities, a web of connection through school, church and shared workspaces. In winter especially, when families are confined in small, poorly ventilated cottages, disease passes easily from household to household. You step outside, the cold morning air both bracing and painful on your face after the relative warmth of the cottage. The lane between the cottages has become a river of mud, churned by countless feet and occasional cartwheels. Several neighbours are already making their way towards the fields or other work sites, their breath visible in the chill air. "Oakley," calls John Thompson, a fellow labourer from 3 cottages down. "Heard your boy's poorly." "Better this morning," you respond, falling into step beside him. "Good fortune there. We lost our Lucy 3 winters back to the lung fever." Thompson's face remains impassive as he delivers this information, not from lack of feeling, but from the particular stoicism that develops when grief is a regular visitor. "The missus says there's sickness all through the village," he continues. "Squire's youngest too, they say, though they've brought a doctor from London for him." This is unsurprising. The Squire's family, while breathing the same rural air as the labourers, inhabits an entirely different world when it comes to healthcare. For them, illness is met with professional medical attention, specialised medicines, dedicated nursing care, and the crucial elements of rest, warmth, and proper nourishment during recovery. The conversation turns to work prospects as you approach the farm. The ground will be too sodden for some tasks, but there are always barns to mend, animals to tend, and preparations for spring planting regardless of weather. Drainage work continues, the foreman announces, when enough men have gathered. Westfield still needs clearing, and we need 4 men for repair work on the north barn roof. You're assigned to the barn work, which means climbing up to replace damaged tiles and shore up the supporting timbers. It's dangerous work, especially on a day when everything is slick with yesterday's rain, but it pays a penny more than the drainage work because of the risk involved. The morning passes in careful, methodical labour. One wrong step on the wet roof could mean a fall, and a fall could mean permanent disability or death. There is no compensation for workplace injuries among agricultural labourers. A man who cannot work simply doesn't get paid, and his family bears the consequences. By midday, you've managed to replace several broken tiles and reinforce a weakened section of roof. Your hands are scraped and bleeding from the rough materials, your back aching from maintaining awkward positions on the sloped surface, but the extra penny makes it worthwhile. That's the difference between plain bread and bread with dripping for tomorrow's breakfast. During the brief midday break, huddled against the barn wall for protection from the wind, conversation turns to illness again. Village is rife with it, confirms Henry Blake, an older labourer with a permanent stoop from decades of field work. My grandson's down with something fierce, burning up 1 minute, shaking with cold the next. Typhoid, maybe, suggests another man. That's what took the Wilsons' girl last month. Or the typhus, says Blake. Hard to tell the difference, ain't it? Both bad business. The casual discussion of potentially fatal diseases reflects their commonplace nature in rural communities. With no understanding of germ theory, limited access to medical care, and living conditions that actively promote disease transmission, rural labourers faced illness, as they faced all hardships, with fatalistic acceptance and whatever practical measures lay within their limited means. What's needed is proper drainage, Blake continues, nodding toward the village. That stagnant pond behind the cottages breeds miasmas, something terrible. Smell it on warm days. That's disease, that is. The prevailing theory among both labourers and medical professionals held that disease was transmitted through miasmas, bad air, often identified by foul smells. While the conclusion was incorrect, the observation that poor sanitation contributed to illness contained a grain of truth. The cottages in your row, like most labourer housing, have minimal sanitary provisions. An outdoor privy might be shared between multiple dwellings, often poorly maintained and located too close to water sources. Waste disposal consists of whatever system residents can improvise, usually a dung heap not far from living quarters. As for clean water, the village pump is the only source, requiring long walks carrying heavy buckets. In summer, when the pump sometimes runs low, water must be fetched from streams that may be contaminated by animal waste, human sewage, or industrial runoff. Heard the new doctor at Upper Westfield's got ideas about clean water preventing disease, offers Thompson. Says we should boil it before drinking. This suggestion is met with sceptical looks. Boiling requires fuel, which is precious and expensive. When faced with immediate needs like warmth or cooking, using fuel to boil drinking water seems an extravagance few can afford. Rich man's notions, Blake dismisses. Next, he'll be saying we should wash daily, like gentry. The brief break ends, and you return to the precarious work on the barn roof. The afternoon seems to stretch endlessly, each movement a negotiation between necessary speed and caution on the slippery surface. When work finally concludes at dusk, you collect the promised wages. 7 pence for a day's labour, including the extra penny for roof work. It feels substantial in your palm after yesterday's uncertainty. The walk home takes you past the village shop where you stop to purchase bread for tomorrow. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Simmons, sister-in-law to the vicar's wife, greets you with the peculiar mix of condescension and familiarity that characterises most cross-class interactions. "Heard there's sickness in your cottage, Oakley?" she remarks while wrapping the loaf in paper. The typhus, is it? Just a winter cough, you respond, unwilling to invite either pity or gossip. Well, best keep them away from others if you can, she advises, as if quarantine were a simple matter in a 2-room dwelling with 9 inhabitants. The squire's concerned about contagion spreading. His boy's been poorly. The message is clear enough. Labourers' children might carry disease to their betters, and this must be prevented regardless of their own suffering. £0.5 for the bread, she adds, naming a price that's a halfpenny higher than last week. You pay without comment. Complaining changes nothing and might damage the fragile relationship with one of the few credit sources available when times get truly desperate. The halfpenny might be a genuine price increase, or it might be Mrs. Simmons's personal tax on families she considers problematic. Either way, it's now built into the cost of feeding your family. Twilight is settling over the village as you continue homeward. Smoke rises from cottage chimneys, creating a grey haze that hangs in the still air. Through windows you glimpse scenes identical to what awaits in your own dwelling. Families gathered around meagre fires, women cooking or mending, children crowded together in too small spaces. Ahead, a small crowd has gathered around the Parkers' cottage. Something in their posture, heads bowed, voices hushed, speaks of tragedy before you're close enough to hear the details. Mrs. Wright, spotting your approach, detaches from the group. It's their youngest, she explains quietly. Gone this afternoon. The croup, they think. Another small body for the churchyard. Eliza Parker was only 4, a year younger than your Thomas. The proximity sends a chill through you that has nothing to do with the evening air. It could so easily have been your cottage drawing this sombre gathering. They're laying her out now, Mrs. Wright continues. Women are taking turns sitting up tonight. Mary's name is down for the hour after midnight. This is part of the community's response to death, practical assistance with the rituals that transform a family member into a corpse ready for burial. Women wash and dress the body. Men sometimes construct a simple coffin if the family can't afford the carpenter's services. Neighbours take on the household's regular tasks, freeing the grieving family for their immediate needs. The Parker children have been distributed among neighbouring cottages for the night, standard practice to keep them from the sight of death preparations and to give the parents space for initial grief. Their oldest boy is likely at the Thompson cottage, the middle children with the Wrights, the baby with whoever has milk to spare. You continue past, pausing only to remove your cap in respect. There will be time tomorrow to speak to Parker, to offer whatever inadequate words of condolence might help. Tonight, the family needs the small privacy that the community can provide by taking on their essential tasks. Your own cottage appears ahead, lantern light glowing through the single downstairs window. Despite everything, the damp, the cold, the constant struggle, the sight provides a moment of profound relief. Your family has survived another day. Inside, Mary looks up from the pot she's stirring. Her expression tells you she's already heard about the Parker child. News travels rapidly through the women's networks of the village. Thomas is better, she reports before you can ask. Took some broth at midday and has been sleeping mostly. No fever returned. One crisis averted, though Elizabeth's cough remains concerning, and now there's the knowledge that croup has claimed a child just down the lane. You hand Mary the bread and the remaining coins from your day's wages. She tucks the money into a small tin kept in a niche in the wall. Savings against rent day, now just 3 weeks away. The evening meal is marginally better than recent days. Potato and barley soup enriched with an onion and the bone from your Sunday bacon, which has simmered all day, extracting every possible bit of flavour and nutrition. The bread is saved for morning. As you eat, Emma reports on the day's events at the cottage, Thomas's fluctuating condition, Elizabeth's persistent cough, the younger children's chores and small adventures. She has managed the household with remarkable competence for her age, a fact both impressive and somewhat heartbreaking. At 12, in wealthier circumstances, she would still be firmly in childhood. Mrs. Bennet came by, she adds, said the doctor will be in the village tomorrow for the squire's boy and might see others if there's need. This is unexpected good fortune. The doctor from Upper Westfield occasionally makes rounds through outlying villages, but his visits are irregular and his time limited. Having him called specifically for the squire's son means he'll already be paid for the journey, making additional consultations more affordable. What's his fee, you ask, though you already suspect it's beyond your means. 6pence for cottagers, she said, if it's just advice. More for medicines. You and Mary exchange glances, performing identical silent calculations. 6pence is most of a day's wages, a significant expenditure. But with 2 children coughing and the knowledge of Eliza Parker's fate heavy in the air, it suddenly seems less optional. We'll see how they are in the morning, Mary decides, the caution in her voice reflecting not indifference to her children's health, but the brutal reality of financial constraint. After the meal comes the brief period of relative leisure before sleep claims the exhausted family. William works on his basket weaving by firelight, his fingers deftly creating useful items from materials that cost nothing. Willow withies gathered from the stream bank, reeds from the pond edge. Mary mends a tear in George's only shirt, squinting in the dim light. The younger children play quietly with homemade toys, a doll fashioned from corn husks, a set of small wooden blocks carved in rare free moments. This is the extent of entertainment in the labourer's cottage. No books except perhaps a Bible and a cheap almanac. No musical instruments unless someone happens to have a mouth harp or whistle. Storytelling remains the primary diversion. Tales passed through generations, reshaped in each telling but maintaining their essential function of temporary escape from harsh reality. Tell about London, Dar, requests Sarah, who has never travelled farther than the neighbouring village. You've only seen London once yourself, a brief journey in your youth when an uncle took you along on a livestock drive, but that glimpse of the great city has been transformed through years of retelling into an elaborate travelogue that delights your children. London, you begin, settling into the familiar rhythm of the tale, is so vast you can walk all day and never see the end of it. Buildings tall as church towers, streets so crowded you can barely move, shops with everything imaginable in their windows. The children listen raptly, even those who've heard it countless times before. For a little while, the damp cottage with its inadequate furnishings fades, replaced by the imagined splendours of a place that exists for them only in stories. Outside, darkness has fully claimed the village. The only sounds are occasional coughs from the sleeping children, the crackle of the dying fire, and the distant calling of an owl hunting in the fields. In cottages up and down the lane, similar scenes play out. Families gathered in the single heated room, sharing the day's small events, preparing for tomorrow's labour, and eventually surrendering to sleep. Soon, Mary will walk to the Parker cottage for her turn, sitting with the dead child, a vigil that combines practical necessity with deep-rooted tradition. The body must not be left alone before burial, partly from spiritual belief, partly to ensure nothing disturbs the carefully arranged remains. This is rural England in the 1850s, a world where community provides the only safety net against individual disaster, where death visits frequently but never becomes routine, where each day's survival represents a victory against enormous odds, a world largely invisible in the grand Victorian narratives of progress, industry and empire, yet encompassing the lived reality of millions. As the fire burns down to embers, the family prepares for sleep. Tomorrow will bring the doctor's visit, more labour if weather permits, and the sombre business of the Parker child's funeral. But for now, in the quiet darkness, there is only the sound of breathing. Some ragged with illness, some deep in exhaustion, and the momentary peace of another day survived. Dawn breaks with unexpected brightness, the sun appearing as a pale disk through thinning clouds. After days of relentless rain, even this weak February sunlight feels like a gift. You wake with the light, your body's internal clock precisely calibrated to maximize available daylight hours regardless of season. Mary's side of the bed is empty. She returned from her vigil at the Parker cottage well after midnight, but rose before you to tend to the children and prepare for the doctor's potential visit. Her capacity for functioning on minimal sleep is one of the many quiet strengths that keep your family afloat. Upstairs, the children are stirring. Thomas coughed intermittently through the night, but his breathing sounds clearer this morning. Elizabeth, however, seems worse, her tiny chest heaving with each laboured breath. "I've saved the egg," Mary says quietly as you join her downstairs. One of your hens occasionally produces an egg even in winter, a small miracle of protein that becomes a critical resource when illness strikes. For Elizabeth and Thomas to share. This represents significant sacrifice. The egg could have been divided among all the children or used to supplement a meal for the entire family. Dedicating it solely to the sick children reflects the severity of your concern, especially for Elizabeth. The morning routine unfolds with practiced efficiency. Emma helps the younger children dress while William fetches water. Mary prepares a thin porridge stretched with the last of yesterday's bread. You check the cottage's structure for new damage from the recent rains. The news isn't good. The persistent dampness has caused a section of wall to bulge slightly, a warning sign familiar to anyone who's lived in poorly constructed cottages. Left unaddressed, it could eventually collapse, but repairs require materials you can't afford and time away from paid labour you can't spare. "We could stuff the worst gaps with straw," Mary suggests, examining the wall with the expert eye of someone who's managed structural emergencies with minimal resources for years. Might hold till spring when the drying weather helps. This is the perpetual calculation of rural poverty, determining which problems must be addressed immediately and which can be temporarily patched with makeshift solutions. The wall will be monitored daily, its deterioration measured against other pressing needs. Outside, the village is coming to life. Smoke rises from cottage chimneys and labourers make their way toward fields and workplaces. The ground remains sodden from days of rain, but the appearance of sun means field work will definitely proceed today. Before you can leave, however, there's the doctor to consider. If he's truly coming to see the squire's son, this rare opportunity for professional medical attention shouldn't be missed, especially with Elizabeth's worsening condition. "I'll wait an hour," you decide. "If he hasn't come by then, I'll have to go to work." Mary nods, understanding the impossible balance between immediate health concerns and the essential income that sustains long-term survival. An hour's delay means potentially reduced wages, if the foreman assigns the best work before you arrive. But Elizabeth's laboured breathing demands this compromise. The doctor arrives just as you're preparing to leave, his gig splashing through muddy puddles as he approaches the cluster of cottages. He stops first at the Parker cottage, a courtesy call to provide official certification of death before continuing to the squire's house. Such documentation is a luxury most labouring families do without, their children's deaths recorded only in church registers if at all. Word travels rapidly through the cottages. Dr. Harrison is willing to see other patients after visiting the squire's son. A small queue forms near the village green, mostly mothers holding coughing children or supporting elderly parents with various ailments. You join them, carrying Elizabeth wrapped in the family's second-best blanket. Mary remains home with Thomas and the others, unable to leave them unattended and unwilling to expose Thomas to the cold when his condition seems to be improving. The wait stretches to nearly 2 hours before the doctor emerges from the squire's house. He looks tired already, though it's barely mid-morning. A man in his 30s with a serious expression and the slightly hurried manner of someone with perpetually insufficient time for the tasks before him. Form an orderly line, he instructs, setting his bag on a wooden bench outside the smithy, which offers some protection from the mud and a relatively central location. Children and elderly first. You find yourself fourth in line, behind Mrs. Wright with her coughing twins, old Mr. Bennett with his rheumatism, and the miller's wife carrying their limp 3-year-old. The atmosphere is tense with collective anxiety. Doctors' visits are so rare that only the most serious concerns warrant the expense and time. When your turn comes, Dr. Harrison examines Elizabeth with practiced efficiency, listening to her chest with a stethoscope and feeling the glands in her neck. Bronchitis, most likely, he determines after less than 2 minutes of examination, not uncommon with these living conditions. The implied criticism of cottage housing hangs in the air between you, a judgment from someone who has likely never experienced such constraints himself, yet not entirely wrong in its medical assessment. Keep her warm, give her plenty of fluids, weak tea with honey if you have it. Steam helps. Hold her near boiling water so she breathes the vapour. He pauses, considering. I can provide a tonic that might ease the congestion. 3p. This presents another impossible calculation. 3p is half a day's wages, yet the tonic might be the difference between Elizabeth's recovery and a funeral like the Parkers face tomorrow. You hand over the coins without hesitation, though mentally you're already recalculating how this will affect the week's food and the looming rent payment. The small brown bottle contains a liquid that smells strongly of camphor and something bitter. The doctor provides terse instructions: 3 drops in water 4 times daily. The supply should last a week if used properly. The boy's improving, he asks, remembering Mary's mention of Thomas when she spoke to him earlier. Seems to be, sir. Fever broke yesterday. He nods briskly. Keep him inside another few days. This weather... He gestures toward the deceptive sunshine, which has already begun yielding to new clouds building on the horizon. February's the killing month, always has been. This grim assessment reflects long experience. February in rural England occupies a particularly treacherous position in the seasonal cycle. Winter food stores running low, bodies weakened by months of cold and damp, yet spring's relief still weeks away. It's when the vulnerable often slip away, their reserves finally exhausted. With Elizabeth and the precious tonic secured, you hurry toward the farm, already anticipating the foreman's displeasure at your late arrival. The delay means you'll likely be assigned the least desirable work available, probably the drainage ditch that needs clearing again after recent rains, or manure spreading in preparation for spring planting. Sure enough, the foreman's greeting is curt. Drainage ditch, south field, same rate as yesterday. You accept without complaint. Any work is better than none. Elizabeth's medicine has already consumed half a day's wages. You cannot afford to lose the other half to principle or pride. The Southfield drainage work is particularly miserable, ankle deep in freezing mud and stagnant water, clearing debris from ditches designed to keep the valuable cropland from becoming waterlogged. By midday, your hands are numb despite constant motion, and your feet have lost all feeling. Weather's turning again, observes Thompson, working alongside you in the ditch. He nods toward the western horizon, where dark clouds are building with ominous speed. Snow, I'd wager, by nightfall? Snow presents its own complex equation of benefits and hardships for labouring families. It might temporarily halt fieldwork, leading to lost wages, but it also preserves food without ice houses or expensive storage methods, provides water when melted, and occasionally creates alternative employment through snow clearing or other weather-related tasks. Doctor saw your little one? Thompson asks, driving his shovel into a particularly stubborn clump of debris. Aye. Bronchitis, he says. Thompson nods grimly. That took my sister's boy 2 winters back. The steam helps though. Get her over a pot of boiling water if you can manage it. This casual exchange of medical information represents a crucial survival mechanism in communities with limited access to professional healthcare. Experience-based knowledge passes between families, creating a collective wisdom about managing illness with available resources. As predicted, the weather shifts dramatically by mid-afternoon. The temperature drops precipitously and the first snowflakes begin swirling across the fields, large wet flakes that melt upon landing but signal the approaching storm. The foreman, watching the horizon, finally calls a halt to the day's labour. No sense continuing. Ground will be frozen by morning anyway. Half day's wage for those who came at proper time, less for latecomers. This reduced payment is expected but still painful. With Elizabeth's medicine already purchased, the day's income will barely cover tomorrow's food, with nothing left for the accumulating rent obligation or other necessities. The walk home through beginning snow is a study in contrasts. The white flakes transforming the landscape create a momentary beauty that belies the harsh realities beneath. Children from the village have emerged to catch snowflakes on their tongues, their delight temporarily overshadowing the knowledge that sustained cold brings its own dangers to inadequately heated cottages. The lane between cottages has begun to freeze, turning yesterday's mud into treacherously slick terrain. Twice you nearly fall before adopting the shuffling gait that offers more stability. A broken limb would mean catastrophe. Weeks without income while still requiring food, fuel, and eventually the dreaded doctor's fees. Your cottage comes into view just as the snow begins falling in earnest. Smoke from the chimney promises warmth within, though you know the reality will be more modest than the ideal such imagery suggests. A small fire carefully maintained with limited fuel, its heat concentrated in one corner of the main room. Inside, Mary has transformed the ordinary cottage into a makeshift sick room. Thomas sits wrapped in blankets near the fire, colour returning to his cheeks as he sips broth from a chipped cup. Elizabeth lies in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a drawer, positioned to receive maximum warmth from the fire without being dangerously close. She took a few drops of the tonic, Mary reports, relieving you of your snow-dusted coat. Seems to breathe easier afterward, but still poorly. You hand over the reduced wages and Mary's expression reflects the same mental calculations you performed earlier, measuring coins against necessities, determining what can be stretched and what must be sacrificed. Bennett had some work for Emma, she says, after tucking the coins away. Cleaning their chicken coop. Paid her in eggs, 3 good ones. This represents significant good fortune. Protein is the most difficult dietary element to obtain consistently on labourers' wages. 3 eggs mean a substantial nutritional boost for the sick children, with perhaps a bit left for the others. The afternoon transitions into a quiet domestic rhythm dictated by necessity and available resources. William returns from school. He attends more regularly than Emma because, as the eldest son, his education is prioritised for future employment prospects. He brings news that school will be closed tomorrow if snow continues, as the teacher lives in the next village and cannot travel through deep drifts. George and Sarah have spent the day gathering fuel under Mary's direction, fallen branches from the hedgerows, dried dung from the fields, anything that might burn without drawing accusations of theft from landowners increasingly protective of every resource, even dead wood that would otherwise rot. As darkness approaches, the snow falls more heavily, transforming the view through your single window into a swirling white curtain. The temperature drops further, and drafts find their way through the cottage's many imperfections. Gaps around the door, cracks in the walls, the thinning thatch that needs replacement you cannot afford. We'll sleep down here tonight, Mary decides, assessing the worsening weather, all together near the fire. This is standard procedure during the coldest weather, abandoning the sleeping loft to concentrate the family's body heat in the main room, supplemented by whatever bedding can be gathered. The floor is hard and the space cramped, but shared warmth makes survival possible when individual isolation might not be. Evening brings the Parker child's wake, not a formal affair as might occur in wealthier households, but a gathering of neighbours bringing what food they can spare, offering comfort through presence rather than words. Custom dictates that you should make an appearance, however brief, to pay respects. "I'll go for both of us," you tell Mary, who normally would attend but cannot leave Elizabeth, just long enough to speak to Parker. The snow has accumulated to several inches, transforming familiar paths into treacherous, unmarked terrain. Lanterns glow from cottage windows, creating islands of warm light in the white darkness. The Parker cottage is easily identifiable by the number of people coming and going, their footprints creating a well-trodden path through the snow. Inside, the scene is one of dignified poverty managing grief with limited resources. The child's body lies on the table, dressed in her best clothes, likely the only decent garment she possessed. Neighbours have contributed flowers from indoor plants and greenery from hedgerows to surround her, creating a semblance of the more elaborate funerary displays seen in wealthier homes. Parker himself stands near the fireplace, accepting condolences with the particular stoicism of a man who cannot afford the luxury of collapsing under grief. His wife sits nearby, surrounded by women who maintain a constant low murmur of conversation, not to minimize the loss, but to demonstrate that life continues, that community remains, that isolation is not added to their burden. "I'm sorry, James," you offer when your turn comes, the inadequacy of words painfully apparent. He nods, gripping your hand briefly. "Doctor says it was the croup, nothing to be done once it takes hold like that." He pauses, then adds, "Heard your little one's poorly too." She is, but the tonic seems to help. An unspoken current passes between you, the awareness that circumstances, timing, or simple fortune meant your child received medicine while his did not. There is no blame in this recognition, only the shared understanding of lives balanced on knife edges of chance and constraint. You don't stay long, your own family needs you, and extended socializing is a luxury reserved for less pressing times. The walk home through deepening snow seems to take twice as long as the journey out, each step requiring careful placement to avoid falls. The cottage is quiet. When you return, the children already asleep in their improvised beds on the floor. Mary sits near Elizabeth, administering another dose of the precious medicine with meticulous care to ensure not a drop is wasted. "No change," she reports softly, "but no worse at least." You settle beside her, both watching the baby's laboured breathing in the firelight. Outside, snow continues falling, insulating the cottage in ways that are both helpful and concerning, trapping heat more effectively but potentially blocking the chimney or collapsing the weakened sections of thatch if accumulation becomes too heavy. "Need to check the roof at first light," you murmur, already planning tomorrow's tasks. "Clear snow before it gets too deep." Mary nods, her mind likely running parallel calculations about food, medicine, and managing the children through what might become a snow day. These constant, complex assessments form the invisible infrastructure of survival in conditions where the margin between subsistence and disaster remains paper-thin. Outside, the snow transforms the village into a temporary wonderland covering mud and decay with pristine whiteness. Inside, by firelight, a family draws closer together, physically and otherwise, creating warmth in defiance of circumstances that constantly threaten to extinguish it. This is February in rural Victorian England, the killing month, as the doctor named it. Yet people endure, adapting to conditions that seem impossibly harsh by modern standards. They navigate weather, illness, and scarcity with knowledge accumulated through generations of similar struggles. creating systems of survival invisible to casual observers but essential to continued existence on the margins of a society experiencing unprecedented prosperity and change elsewhere. As the fire burns low and the cottage grows quieter, the snow outside provides a rare gift, acoustic insulation that blocks the usual night sounds of the village, creating a bubble of unusual peace around the sleeping family. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, snow to clear, a funeral to attend, work to find if weather permits. But tonight, in this moment, there is only the gentle rhythm of breathing, some laboured, some deep in exhaustion's embrace, all precious in their continuation against considerable odds. Morning arrives beneath a blanket of snow several inches deep, transforming the village landscape into something almost picturesque if one could ignore the practical implications. The white covering temporarily masks the mud, the disrepair, the grinding poverty, visible in every aspect of the cottages. For a brief moment, even the most decrepit dwellings look like the Christmas card images of rural charm that wealthy Londoners might exchange. The illusion shatters quickly with the day's first demands. The snow must be cleared from paths, the weakened cottage roof must be lightened before its weight causes collapse, water must be fetched despite treacherous footing, and work must be found if the family is to eat today. "School's closed," William announces after venturing to the lane, where news travels between children faster than between adults. Teacher can't get through from Upper Westfield. This creates both opportunity and challenge. More hands available for chores, but also more mouths present all day requiring food and warmth. Mary makes immediate adjustments to the day's organisation. "William, help your father clear the snow. Emma, mind Elizabeth while I take Thomas with me to see about washing work. Sarah and George, stay by the fire and sort these beans Mrs. Thompson sent over." The beans, perhaps a quart of dried legumes likely saved from Thompson's garden plot, represent neighbourly support following your visit to their deceased child's wake. Not charity exactly, which might damage pride, but the quiet circulation of resources that helps each family survive. Today, the Thompsons share beans. Next month, when their youngest might need watching while Mrs. Thompson delivers laundry, your family will reciprocate. You and William tackle the snow clearing, starting with the path to the privy shared between 4 cottages. Outdoor sanitation facilities present particular challenges in winter. The path must remain passable regardless of weather, as the alternative means chamber pots emptied less frequently, creating additional health hazards in already compromised living quarters. Look at the roof. William points toward the cottage's southern corner, where snow has slid to reveal a section of thatch in serious disrepair. The straw has rotted through in places, creating an area where rain and snow can penetrate directly to the wooden supports beneath. If those supports rot, the roof's integrity becomes compromised beyond simple patching. "We'll need proper repairs come spring," you acknowledge, mentally adding another expense to the impossible ledger of needs versus means. "For now, we'll patch with whatever dry straw we can find." William nods with the seriousness of a child who has never known the luxury of taking shelter for granted. At 10, he understands structural vulnerabilities and maintenance requirements that wealthier children would never need to consider. After clearing essential paths, you climb cautiously onto the cottage roof to remove snow from the most damaged sections. The vantage point provides a rare elevated view of the village, smoke rising from chimneys, people clearing their own paths, and beyond them, the substantial farm buildings and the distant outline of the squire's house, where multiple chimneys produce robust plumes of smoke suggesting fires in every room. The visual reminder of disparity is commonplace, but never ceases to provoke complex emotions. Not exactly envy, which implies a sense of entitlement to such comforts, but a weary awareness of the vast distance between basic security and the abundance visible on the horizon. With immediate structural dangers addressed, attention turns to income. The heavy snow makes field work unlikely today, but the farm's animals still need tending, and there might be snow clearing work available on the main roads if you arrive before other labourers claim these limited opportunities. "I'll try the farm first, then the coach road if nothing's available there," you tell Mary, who has returned with Thomas to report that the vicar's wife has washing that needs collecting, a half-day's work that will help offset today's reduced earnings. The snow has transformed your usual path to the farm, requiring careful navigation across fields now unmarked by familiar boundaries. The cold bites through worn boots, and your breath creates clouds in the frigid air. Other men converge on the same destination, their dark figures stark against the white landscape. At the farm, the foreman confirms your prediction. No field work today or likely tomorrow. Need 2 men for barn cleaning and animal tending. Rest of you try the roads. They're clearing toward the market town, taking on strong backs by the day. You miss being selected for the farm work, which would have been physically demanding but sheltered from the elements. Instead, you join several other men heading toward the coach road 3 miles distant, where snow clearing operations might offer alternative employment. The walk itself becomes an ordeal through snow that reaches mid-calf in places. By the time your group reaches the coach road, your feet have lost feeling despite constant motion, and your hands ache with cold inside inadequate mittens knitted from scraps of yarn. Luck favours you this morning, the road queen. The road clearing operation is still seeking labourers. The overseer, a barrel-chested man with the weathered face of someone who works outdoors in all seasons, sizes up the arriving group. 6 pence for the day, work until dark, clear to the edges, full width for coaches to pass, no slacking or you're replaced on the spot. The pay is standard for day labour, neither generous nor exploitative by local standards. The work, however, is particularly gruelling, continuous shovelling for hours without shelter, moving heavy, wet snow from the road surface to its edges to allow coach traffic between villages and market towns. By midday, your back and shoulders burn with the repetitive motion, and sweat mingles with melting snow despite the cold temperature. The physical cost of such labour accumulates over years, visible in the bent postures and gnarled hands of older workers who've spent decades in similar conditions. There's little conversation beyond occasional grunts of effort or warnings about ice patches. Energy must be conserved for the task at hand, and breath saved rather than expended on unnecessary words. The monotony creates a particular state of mind, a narrowing of focus to the next shovelful, the next section of road, the next hour to be endured. A coach passes around noon, its wealthy occupants barely glancing at the men clearing their path. Their journey from comfortable house to comfortable destination continues uninterrupted, their experience of winter weather limited to the scenic aspects visible through windows. The contrast between their protected passage and your exposed labour goes unremarked because it is utterly commonplace. Mid-afternoon brings a brief break when the overseer distributes bread and weak beer, not from generosity but practical necessity, as men working at this intensity need some sustenance to continue effectively. You eat standing in the road, the cold bread feeling like stones in your empty stomach, but providing essential calories for the remaining hours of labour. As daylight begins fading around 4 o'clock, the overseer inspects the cleared sections, pronouncing them adequate for coach passage. He distributes the promised payment, 6 pence for approximately 8 hours of continuous physical exertion, before dismissing the crew with the possibility of additional work tomorrow if snow continues. The return journey feels twice as long as the morning's walk, your body now depleted by hours of hard labour and inadequate nourishment. The coins in your pocket provide some psychological comfort. Today's food is secured at least, but the physical cost of earning them settles deeper into your bones with each passing year. Villages appear isolated in the winter landscape, smoke from chimneys creating the only movement against the white fields and darkening sky. By the time you reach your own cottage, full darkness has fallen and the temperature has dropped further, freezing the day's melt into treacherous patches of ice. The cottage window glows with faint light. Mary has lit a single candle, another indicator that today holds some significance beyond ordinary struggle. Candles, expensive compared to their brief utility, are reserved for essential needs or rare moments of celebration. Inside, you discover the reason for this unusual expenditure. Elizabeth's condition has improved noticeably, her breathing easier, her colour better, her previously listless demeanour replaced by alert eyes tracking movement around the room. The medicine, the steam treatments, and perhaps simply her young body's resilience have combined to turn the tide against illness. She took broth 3 times today, Mary reports, relief evident in her voice despite her typical understatement. And the cough sounds looser. This represents significant victory, not complete recovery, but movement away from the precipice that claimed the Parker child. The family's mood reflects this cautious optimism, the atmosphere lighter despite physical exhaustion and ongoing challenges. The evening meal consists of bean soup made from Mrs. Thompson's contribution, enriched with an onion and scraps of salt pork saved from previous cooking. The bread purchased with yesterday's wages has been carefully rationed, with enough remaining for each family member to receive a small piece to accompany their soup. After eating, the family settles into evening activities determined by necessity, ability, and available light. Mary continues the mending that forms a constant backdrop to all other household tasks, clothing in perpetual need of repair, each garment patched repeatedly until patches themselves need patching. Emma helps the younger children prepare for bed, washing faces and hands with water warmed by the fire. William works on a small carving project, a replacement handle for a broken tool, its careful craftsmanship reflecting skills passed from father to son. This evening routine represents more than simple domestic activities. It constitutes the maintenance of family bonds and transmission of essential knowledge between generations. Children learn not just specific skills, but the underlying principles of resourcefulness, persistence, and mutual support that make survival possible in challenging circumstances. Conversation flows more easily than during morning's task-focused interactions. Stories are shared, humorous incidents from William's school day before closure was announced, village news gathered during Mary's laundry delivery, observations about neighbours, glimpsed during snow clearing. They're burying the Parker girl tomorrow, Mary mentions during a lull. After morning service, the ground's frozen solid. They've had men working since midday to dig the grave. This practical concern, the difficulty of breaking through frozen earth, temporarily overshadows the emotional aspects of a child's funeral, not from callousness, but from necessity. The physical requirements must be addressed before grief can be fully acknowledged. We should all go, you decide, after brief consideration. Weather permitting. Church attendance is already non-negotiable for Sunday mornings, but funerals represent additional obligation, especially for neighbours whose child played alongside your own. The community's presence provides both witness and support, affirming connections that sustain everyone through individual tragedies. As evening deepens, attention turns to sleeping arrangements, with Elizabeth improving but still vulnerable and temperatures continuing to drop outside. The family will again sleep in the main room, clustered near the fire for warmth. Bedding is arranged with careful strategy. The youngest and most vulnerable closest to the heat source, adults positioned to block drafts from doors and windows, older children filling spaces between. Before final settling, there's the matter of washing, limited by water availability and heating capacity, but essential for maintaining basic hygiene despite challenging conditions. Children take turns standing in a small tin tub, water heated just enough to remove the worst dirt without requiring excessive fuel. Speed is essential. The cottage's temperature drops rapidly away from the fire's immediate vicinity. Clean hands and faces, at least, Mary insists, supervising the abbreviated bathing. Even in winter, this commitment to cleanliness, despite circumstantial obstacles, reflects not just personal preference, but practical health consideration. Experience has taught that dirt harbours disease, that minor cuts can become major infections without proper cleansing. Long before germ theory provides scientific explanation, observation has established correlation between hygiene and health. With washing complete and bedding arranged, the family gathers for one final ritual before sleep, prayers led by you as household head. The content reflects immediate concerns rather than abstract theology. Gratitude for Elizabeth's improvement, for work found despite weather, for food sufficient for today's needs, requests for continued healing for tomorrow's necessities, for strength to meet whatever challenges arise. Religion in the labourer's cottage serves both spiritual and practical purposes. Beyond eternal considerations, it provides framework for understanding suffering, language for expressing hope, and community connection through shared practice. The church as institution may sometimes disappoint through class prejudice or inadequate charity, but faith itself remains integral to daily resilience. After prayers, the candle is extinguished to save what remains for future need. Darkness fills the cottage except for the fire's diminishing glow. Conversation continues briefly in hushed tones, then gradually yields to silence as exhaustion claims each family member in turn. You remain awake longest, listening to your family's breathing. Elizabeth still slightly laboured but significantly improved. Thomas is occasionally interrupted by residual coughing, the others deep in the profound sleep of childhood. Mary lies beside you, her body radiating familiar warmth, her hand resting lightly on Elizabeth's small form between you. This moment, family gathered in intimate proximity, temporarily secure against immediate threat, represents the core around which all other struggles revolve. The daily labour, constant calculation, and physical hardship serve this essential purpose, maintaining the small collection of interdependent lives against forces that constantly threaten to scatter or extinguish them. Outside, snow resumes falling in the darkness, accumulating silently on the newly cleared paths. Tomorrow will require clearing again, another search for work, continued vigilance against illness and structural damage. The cycle of effort never truly ends, it merely pauses during these brief hours of rest. Yet within the cottage's inadequate shelter, something genuine and precious exists. Bonds of affection and mutual dependence that transform mere survival into something resembling life. Children who will likely never escape similar material circumstances, nevertheless experience security within family relationships. Adults whose bodies are prematurely aged by labour and deprivation find purpose in providing what stability they can for their offspring. As sleep finally claims you, the last conscious awareness is of this paradox, profound hardship coexisting with profound connection, neither cancelling the other, but creating the complex reality of rural working-class existence in Victorian England, a reality largely invisible in official narratives of progress and prosperity, yet lived by millions whose labour forms the foundation upon which more visible achievements rest. In the quiet darkness, snow continues falling, wood settles in the dying fire, and a family sleeps, their breaths creating the only sound in a momentary peace that will end with tomorrow's first light and renewed demands of survival. Sunday arrives with a pewter sky promising more snow by afternoon. The church bell tolls with a hollow resonance across the white-blanketed village, summoning parishioners not just for regular service, but for the funeral to follow. Death in winter is so common that the church has established an efficient rhythm. Regular worship followed immediately by burial, maximising the use of gathered community and minimising exposure to harsh elements. Your family dresses in their modest best, the same clothes worn for every Sunday service but brushed with particular care today out of respect for the occasion. Elizabeth, still weak but markedly improved, will remain home with Emma while the rest attend, both to protect her fragile recovery and to maintain the household fire, which cannot be allowed to die completely during winter absences. Remember to add wood every half hour, Mary reminds Emma, who at 12 already understands these responsibilities perfectly but accepts the instruction with characteristic patience. And give Elizabeth her medicine at 11 o'clock no matter if she's sleeping. The walk to church takes longer than usual, paths refrozen overnight into treacherous surfaces requiring careful navigation. Thomas coughs occasionally but seems stronger, his illness receding while his sister's continues improving. Small victories in the constant battle against conditions that claim so many children. Other families emerge from cottages along the way, all moving toward the same destination with the measured pace of those conserving energy against cold. Conversations remain minimal, limited to brief acknowledgements between neighbours united by the morning's sombre purpose. Inside the church, the temperature feels barely warmer than outside, despite several small braziers positioned in the nave. The stone walls radiate cold, and breath forms visible clouds throughout the congregation. Wealthier parishioners have brought foot warmers, small metal containers filled with hot coals, while labourers rely on stamping feet and huddling together between prayers. The Parker family occupies the front pew today, their temporary elevation from usual position at the back an acknowledgement of their central role in the day's proceedings. The small coffin rests before the altar, its unvarnished pine construction covered partially by an altar cloth to create an approximation of more elaborate funerary displays seen in wealthier parishes. "Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted," the vicar begins, his voice steady with the practice of one who conducts winter funerals with considerable regularity. The service follows familiar contours, prayers, hymns, brief sermon on mortality and divine comfort, but today includes specific acknowledgement of Eliza Parker, aged 4 years and 3 months, now departed from earthly suffering. Mrs. Parker weeps silently throughout, her husband's arm around her shoulders in rare public display of affection between adults who typically maintain emotional reserve. Their remaining children cluster nearby, faces solemn with the peculiar gravity of young ones who understand death as a concrete reality rather than abstract concept. After service concludes, the congregation moves to the churchyard, where men from the village have spent hours preparing the grave, a task made arduous by frozen ground requiring pickaxes and extraordinary effort. The small coffin seems suddenly more fragile in outdoor light, an inadequate container for what was recently a laughing child. "I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord," the vicar continues as the coffin is lowered by ropes into the waiting earth. "He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live." The words, repeated at countless gravesides through centuries, offer familiar rhythm, if not immediate comfort to those assembled. Faith provides framework for understanding, but cannot eliminate grief's immediate impact, the visceral knowledge of permanent absence that no theological explanation fully addresses. After final prayers, men begin the work of filling the grave while women guide the Parker family back toward their cottage where food has been arranged. Contributions from throughout the village creating a meal beyond what any single household could provide independently. This practical support acknowledges that grief impairs capacity for daily tasks, yet bodies continue requiring sustenance regardless of emotional circumstances. Your family joins others returning to respective cottages, Sunday's remaining hours devoted to necessary rest and preparation for the work week ahead. The snow begins falling again as predicted, large flakes descending in the peculiar silence that accompanies heavy snowfall, as if the world itself observes respectful quiet after the morning's events. The Bennett boy looked poorly, Mary observes, as you approach your cottage, flushed and glassy-eyed like Thomas was at the worst. Half the choir was missing too, you add, having noted several absent faces among regular attendees. Weather perhaps, but more likely illness. This observation proves prescient in coming days as news travels between cottages of increasing sickness throughout the village. By Tuesday, the school closes not for snow, but because both teacher and half the pupils are confined to beds with fever and cough. By Wednesday, even the wealthier households report illness among family members and servants, though with access to immediate medical attention and proper nursing, their experiences differ substantially from labourers' families facing similar symptoms. The village exists now in the grip of what older residents recognise as winter fever, the influenza that periodically sweeps through communities with devastating efficiency. Modern understanding would identify viral transmission facilitated by close quarters, inadequate ventilation and compromised immune systems, but villagers in 1853 perceive only the pattern of spread and the seemingly arbitrary distribution of severity between victims. Your household has already weathered the initial wave through Thomas and Elizabeth, whose improving conditions suggest the possibility of acquired immunity, though such scientific concepts remain unavailable as explanation. What matters practically is that while Elizabeth continues her slow recovery and Thomas regains strength, no other family members have developed severe symptoms beyond occasional coughing. This relative good fortune creates both opportunity and obligation within the community's unwritten mutual aid system. Those households less affected by illness become essential support for those more severely impacted, providing childcare, delivering food, fetching medicine, maintaining fires, and performing other essential tasks when families cannot manage independently. Mary, whose nursing skills have been honed through years of managing childhood illnesses with minimal resources, becomes particular resource for neighbours with sick children. She divides her time between your own household responsibilities and brief visits to nearby cottages, sharing knowledge about which treatments seem effective and which symptoms demand urgent concern. The Thompsons' youngest has the fever now, she reports, after returning from delivering bread to their cottage, and Mrs. Wright is confined to bed herself with no one but her eldest girl to manage the household. These situations require immediate practical response rather than mere sympathy. Emma is dispatched to assist the Wright girl with younger children, while you stop at the Thompson cottage after work to chop additional firewood, tasks completed without fanfare or expectation of reciprocity, beyond the unspoken understanding that help would be similarly offered if circumstances were reversed. The village's informal support networks operate alongside more official responses to the outbreak. The church organises distribution of donated food and fuel to households most severely affected. The doctor from Upper Westfield makes more frequent visits, though his time remains primarily devoted to wealthier patients who can afford regular attendance. The vicar's wife organises a committee of relatively healthy women to coordinate care efforts, creating a system for identifying which households need immediate assistance. Despite these combined efforts, death continues its winter harvest. By week's end, 3 more funerals have been conducted. An elderly man whose age and existing health conditions left him particularly vulnerable. A young mother whose recently delivered infant now requires wet nurse. And, most devastatingly, a previously healthy man in his 30s whose income supported his wife and 5 children. This last death creates immediate crisis beyond grief. Without male earner, the widow faces impossible situation: inadequate savings to maintain rent payments, insufficient income potential through traditional female employment like laundry or sewing, and children too young to contribute substantially through labour. The workhouse looms as likely destination unless alternative support materialises. The community responds with remarkable coordination despite its own limited resources. Men from neighbouring cottages commit to including the widow's garden plot in their planting and maintenance, ensuring food supply beyond immediate crisis. The church arranges temporary rent forgiveness through appeal to the squire's Christian charity and concern about parish poor rates if family enters workhouse. Women organise cooking rotation to provide one substantial meal daily while the household adjusts to new circumstances. These efforts cannot replace the fundamental loss of primary earner, but they create breathing space for adaptation rather than immediate destitution. The eldest boy, only 8, will likely be removed from school sooner than planned to begin contributory labour. The widow will take on additional washing and mending beyond what would be considered manageable in normal circumstances. The family will exist in more precarious economic condition indefinitely, but immediate dissolution has been prevented through collective intervention. Throughout this period, your own family maintains fragile stability despite ongoing challenges. The snow eventually diminishes enough for regular field work to resume, providing steadier income than occasional road clearing. Elizabeth continues improving gradually, though her recovery consumes resources through special foods and medicine that strain already limited budget. The cottage roof continues deteriorating in sections, requiring increasingly creative temporary repairs, while proper maintenance remains financially unattainable. What emerges through these weeks of community crisis is the intricate interdependence that defines rural working-class existence. No household operates truly independently. Survival requires complex networks of mutual obligation, shared resources, and collective knowledge. The absence of formal safety nets makes these informal systems not optional but essential, the difference between individual catastrophe and continued existence. These systems remain largely invisible to outside observers, particularly those from privileged perspectives who might visit rural areas briefly and perceive only the material poverty rather than the social wealth operating beneath visible surfaces. The ability to sustain life despite inadequate housing, insufficient nutrition, limited medical care, and constant financial precarity represents extraordinary achievement rarely acknowledged in official narratives of the period. By early March, the immediate health crisis begins subsiding. Fewer new cases develop, and previously ill villagers gradually resume normal activities as strength returns. The weather remains challenging, but shows occasional hints of approaching spring. Slightly longer daylight hours, brief periods of relative warmth during midday, small patches where snow has melted to reveal dormant earth beneath. These changes bring their own difficulties for rural labourers. The transition from winter to spring creates notorious mud season when roads become nearly impassable, fields too wet for proper work, and cottages particularly vulnerable to dampness as frozen ground thaws and releases accumulated moisture. Dietary challenges intensify as winter stores approach depletion while spring growth remains weeks away from harvest. Yet the community has survived another winter, diminished by losses but continuing through adaptation and mutual support. Children play outside during brief periods of sunshine, their games modified to accommodate muddy conditions but retaining essential exuberance. Women begin preliminary preparations for gardens, assessing seed supplies and planning optimal use of limited growing space. Men repair tools damaged during winter work and prepare for the intensive labor of spring planting. Your own household follows similar patterns of cautious transition. Thomas has fully recovered, resuming school attendance when classes reconvene. Elizabeth gains strength daily, though she remains smaller and more fragile than before her illness. The lasting impact of severe respiratory infection during crucial developmental period. Mary organises thorough cottage cleaning as weather permits, opening windows, addressing accumulated winter grime with limited resources but considerable determination. One unusually mild afternoon, you repair the cottage's front step that has deteriorated through multiple freeze-thaw cycles. William works alongside you, handling tools with growing competence and absorbing unspoken knowledge about home maintenance that will serve him throughout life. The physical labour provides counterbalance to the previous week's emotional weight, tangible accomplishment in making your dwelling marginally more functional. Think it'll hold through spring thaw? William asks, assessing the repaired step with critical eye. Should do, you respond, knowing the repair's limitations, but appreciating its immediate improvement. We'll see about proper stone come summer, perhaps. This exchange captures the essence of your existence, addressing immediate needs with available resources while maintaining provisional plans for more substantial improvements that may or may not materialize. Neither false optimism nor complete surrender to circumstances, but practical navigation between necessity and possibility. As dusk approaches, Mary appears at the doorway, Elizabeth in her arms, the first time the child has been outside since her illness began. Her small face turns toward fading sunlight with evident pleasure, colour returning to previously pale cheeks. "Thought she could use a bit of fresh air," Mary explains, the simple statement conveying both medical assessment and celebration of recovery milestone. This quiet moment, child returned from illness's edge, family engaged in maintaining their modest home, community gradually healing from collective trauma, represents victory of sorts, though not the kind recorded in official histories. The absence of complete catastrophe becomes achievement when expectations have been tempered by generations of similar struggle. As evening gathers, neighbours return from various labours to respective cottages. Smoke rises from chimneys, lanterns glow in windows, and informal interactions occur as paths cross. Brief exchanges about health improvements, work availability, weather predictions. These seemingly mundane conversations cement community bonds that have been tested but not broken by recent trials. Inside your cottage, the evening routine unfolds with its own modest comforts. The fire provides adequate warmth, the meal stretches available ingredients to satisfying if simple nourishment, and family conversation flows with renewed energy now that immediate crisis has passed. Elizabeth sits propped in Mary's lap, accepting small spoonfuls of broth with increasing appetite, another sign of recovery that provokes quiet satisfaction. Later, as children settle towards sleep and adults complete final daily tasks, the conversation turns inevitably toward future planning, adjustments needed for approaching seasonal changes, work opportunities that might appear with spring planting, potential garden improvements to increase food production. "Might plant more potatoes this year," Mary suggests, mentally recalculating growing space allocations based on winter's lessons about food security. "And perhaps beans for drying." This forward orientation, despite recent hardship, represents not naive optimism but essential survival strategy, the ability to extract lessons from difficulty and apply them toward incremental improvement. Without such capacity, the relentless challenges of rural poverty would prove insurmountable rather than merely exhausting. As night deepens and the cottage grows quiet, you perform final check of the fire's safety before joining Mary in bed. The children sleep peacefully, including Elizabeth, whose breathing has finally lost the concerning rattle that accompanied her illness for weeks. Outside, the village has settled into similar quietude, collective recovery continuing through rest as much as active effort. Tomorrow will bring its own demands. Labour resumed, resources calculated, ongoing adjustments to changing conditions. The margin between survival and disaster remains perpetually thin, requiring constant vigilance and adaptation. Yet tonight, in the gentle breathing of sleeping children and the solid presence of your wife beside you, there exists momentary peace within circumstances that objective assessment would deem unacceptable. This capacity to create genuine human connection and meaning within material conditions of extreme hardship represents perhaps the most remarkable achievement of rural working-class communities in Victorian England, not merely surviving, but maintaining humanity through collective effort and intimate bonds despite environments seemingly designed to crush both. As sleep approaches, carrying consciousness away from immediate awareness of cold floors, inadequate blankets, and tomorrow's guaranteed hardships, there remains this essential truth. Within the forgotten corners of Victorian prosperity, life continued with dignity and connection despite officially invisible suffering. The cottages may have been deemed dens by outside observers, but within them existed families and communities whose resilience deserves recognition beyond patronizing pity or romantic idealization. Their story, your story, constitutes historical reality as legitimate as any account of industrial achievement or imperial expansion, though documented primarily through absence rather than celebratory record. The ability to create home within hovels, community within deprivation, and meaningful existence within structural oppression represents human achievement worthy of acknowledgement beyond statistical footnote or cautionary example. Sleep finally claims you completely, body surrendering to exhaustion earned through physical labor and emotional endurance. Outside, stars emerge from parting clouds, casting faint light across the village, whose collective breaths create the gentle rhythm of continued existence against considerable odds. Spring arrives not as sudden transformation, but gradual surrender of winter's hold, a slow yielding marked by subtle changes observed most keenly by those whose survival depends on intimate knowledge of seasonal rhythms. The first snowdrops appear in sheltered spots near cottage walls, their delicate white bells pushing through retreating snow with improbable determination. Birdsong becomes more varied and insistent at dawn, blackbirds and thrushes reclaiming territory with elaborate melodies. Daylight extends incrementally, each evening offering precious additional minutes of natural light for necessary tasks. These changes bring tangible relief to the village. Illness recedes alongside winter's worst extremes, though lingering coughs and weakened constitutions remain common. Fieldwork resumes more consistently, providing steadier income after months of unpredictable employment. Cottages benefit from being aired properly during milder days, reducing the damp that permeates walls and bedding during winter confinement. For your family, spring's arrival marks successful passage through another season of particular vulnerability. Elizabeth has recovered sufficiently to join other children in brief outdoor play during warm afternoons. The cottage roof, despite concerning deterioration, has maintained minimal functionality through the worst weather. Food stores, though severely depleted, have stretched just enough to reach the season when new growth begins providing alternatives. This evening, a mild April night with lingering twilight finds your family engaged in the gentle unwinding that precedes sleep. The day's labour has concluded, simple meal consumed, essential tasks completed. What remains are the quiet rituals that transform mere shelter into something approaching home despite material limitations. Mary sits near the fire mending one of William's shirts, her needle moving with practiced precision through worn fabric. Years of such repairs have given her remarkable skill at extracting maximum use from every garment, postponing the substantial expense of replacement through countless interventions against developing tears and weakening seams. Nearly worn through at the elbows again, she observes without particular concern, this being expected consequence of boyhood activities rather than crisis requiring emotional response. Might need patches soon. William himself sits nearby working on school exercises, multiplication tables copied repeatedly onto a small slate that can be wiped clean and reused indefinitely, conserving precious paper for final work requiring submission. At 10, he navigates between childhood's remaining playfulness and increasing responsibilities that preview adult expectations soon to claim him completely. Emma assists younger children with bedtime preparations, her maternal competence at 12 reflecting early assumption of adult roles common among eldest daughters in labouring families. Under her direction, faces and hands receive thorough washing despite minimal water and soap. Hair is combed free of the day's tangles and teeth receive attention through chewing fresh mint when available or simply vigorous rinsing when not. The younger children, Sarah, George and Thomas, move through these routines with varying degrees of compliance, their energy gradually diminishing as day concludes. Their play has already transitioned from active movement to quieter activities appropriate for evening's constraints. Simple games with pebbles or buttons, stories told in whispers, imaginary scenarios enacted with minimal props but considerable creativity. Elizabeth, still requiring additional rest during recovery, has already drifted to sleep in the small trundle bed positioned near the fire for warmth. Her breathing remains slightly more laboured than before illness, but lacks the frightening rattle that signalled acute danger weeks earlier. Her small face appears peaceful in firelight, colour returned to previously alarming pallor. You yourself occupy the cottage's single proper chair, a heavily repaired wooden piece inherited from Mary's parents that predates your marriage. From this modest throne, you oversee evening's gentle conclusion while completing practical task, repairing a broken tool handle with careful whittling that shapes replacement wood to proper dimensions. This scene, utterly ordinary in its elements yet profound in its implications, represents achievement rarely acknowledged by contemporary observers or subsequent historical accounts. The creation of domestic tranquility despite material deprivation constitutes resistance against circumstances seemingly designed to eliminate such possibility. The cottage itself remains objectively inadequate by any reasonable standard. 2 small rooms housing 9 people, structural deficiencies threatening stability, sanitation limited to outdoor privy, shared between multiple dwellings, ventilation compromised by competing needs for heat retention and fresh air circulation. Contemporary social reformers would correctly identify numerous health hazards and developmental concerns arising from such conditions. Yet within these constraints, the family has created genuine home through consistent effort and accumulated knowledge. The floor is swept clean despite being uneven brick prone to dampness. Bedding, though insufficient and often damp, is arranged to maximize available warmth through strategic placement near heat sources and careful layering. The fire is maintained at optimal balance between necessary warmth and precious fuel conservation. Meals, though monotonous and nutritionally limited, are prepared with attention to extracting maximum flavor and satisfaction from minimal ingredients. These domestic accomplishments represent not mere housekeeping, but active creation of survivable environment within circumstances that might otherwise prove literally fatal. The difference between tolerable cold and hypothermia, between adequate nutrition and malnutrition, between manageable illness and devastating epidemic, often depends entirely on such seemingly mundane details executed with precision born of generational experience. Outside, darkness has fully claimed the village, punctuated by occasional lantern light from neighbouring cottages and distant glow from substantial homes on surrounding estates. Stars emerge in remarkable profusion, their visibility enhanced by absence of artificial illumination that will characterise later eras. The night carries sounds of rural settlement, occasional animal noises from nearby farms, distant church clock marking hours, gentle rustle of breeze through emerging spring foliage. Inside, conversation flows with evening's characteristic gentleness, voices naturally softening as night deepens and bodies yield to accumulated fatigue. Unlike daytime interaction focused primarily on immediate tasks and necessities, evening discussion often expands to include reminiscence, speculation, and occasional storytelling. "Tell about grandmother's cottage, Ma," requests Sarah, who never met Mary's mother but maintains keen interest in family history preserved primarily through oral tradition rather than written record. Mary continues her mending while speaking, attention divided between needle and narrative with practiced ease. It was smaller than ours, just the one room for everyone, but she kept herbs hanging from every beam, bundles of rosemary and thyme, mint and sage, all dried and ready for cooking or medicine. The whole place smelled like her garden, summer and winter alike. These stories serve multiple purposes beyond entertainment, transmitting practical knowledge about household management, preserving family identity through shared narrative, and creating psychological continuity between generations. Children absorb not just specific information, but broader values and approaches to life embedded within seemingly simple reminiscences. William looks up from his slate, calculation temporarily abandoned for historical curiosity. Did she have her own garden plot like you do? Smaller than ours, Mary confirms, memory briefly transporting her to childhood experiences now decades distant. But she knew how to make things grow in poor soil, said it was about understanding what each plant needs, not just putting seeds in ground and hoping. This casual exchange represents crucial knowledge transmission, practical gardening wisdom accumulated through generations of subsistence cultivation passed now to children who will require similar skills for survival. Without formal agricultural education, such information travels exclusively through direct observation and verbal instruction within family networks. The evening progresses towards sleep through gradual transitions rather than abrupt conclusion. Younger children move from quiet play to drowsy listening before finally surrendering to slumber in their shared sleeping spaces. William completes his school exercises and carefully places the slate where morning light will allow review before departure. Emma finishes helping siblings and turns to her own preparations for tomorrow's responsibilities. Mary's mending continues longest among evening activities, her work extending until absolutely necessary to conserve precious candle or lamp oil. Her hands maintain remarkable precision even in diminishing light, finding tears and weaknesses through touch when visibility fails. This ability to accomplish essential tasks despite inadequate conditions represents adaptation developed through necessity rather than choice. As activities conclude and family members settle towards sleep, conversation gradually yields to comfortable silence, punctuated only by fire's occasional crackle and sleeping children's gentle breathing. This progression, from day's intensity through evening's measured activities to night's quietude, creates natural rhythm that sustained rural communities through generations, providing essential psychological counterbalance to physical hardship. You bank the fire carefully for night, reducing flame to conserve fuel while maintaining sufficient embers for morning revival without requiring precious matches. This seemingly minor task represents culmination of considerable skill developed through experience, its proper execution potentially determining whether tomorrow begins with essential warmth or problematic fuel depletion. Mary completes her mending and joins final preparations for sleep, moving through familiar patterns with minimal need for light or discussion. Years of shared routine have created wordless choreography between you, each anticipating the other's movements in the confined space with practiced efficiency. Before final settling, you perform habitual check of sleeping children, subtle confirmation that all breathe normally, none have kicked free of covers, youngest remain positioned for optimal warmth. This brief ritual, unremarkable in execution but profound in implication, encapsulates parental vigilance maintained despite exhaustion and competing demands. Outside, the village has fallen into deeper silence as other households similarly conclude their days. Occasional sounds penetrate the cottage's thin walls, distant owl call, neighbour's dog barking briefly at imagined intrusion, wind finding passage through imperfect thatch. These nocturnal notes form familiar acoustic backdrop to rural sleep, neither disturbing nor requiring conscious attention. As you finally join Mary in the bed positioned for optimal protection from drafts while maintaining connection to fire's residual warmth, conversation resurfaces briefly, quiet exchange of observations or concerns too private for earlier family discussion. Elizabeth seems stronger today, Mary notes, her voice barely above whisper to avoid disturbing children's sleep in the room's close quarters. Played longer than yesterday without tiring. Another week might see her fully recovered. Your response carries appropriate caution, experience having taught that illness often lingers beyond apparent recovery, particularly in winter's aftermath when bodies remain depleted from months of cold and dietary limitation. This bedtime consultation focused primarily on children's well-being but occasionally expanding to include work prospects, financial calculations or community developments represents essential communication between partners jointly navigating circumstances requiring constant strategic adjustment. Without such regular assessment and planning, the precarious balance between survival and disaster might easily tip toward the latter. Conversation gradually fades as physical exhaustion claims consciousness despite mental concerns that might otherwise prevent sleep. This capacity to achieve necessary rest despite legitimate anxieties about tomorrow's challenges represents another adaptation essential to sustained functioning under perpetual stress. As sleep approaches, bringing temporary relief from bodily discomfort and conscious worry, the cottage settles into night's deepest quietude. The physical structure, however inadequate by objective standards, provides crucial barrier between family and elements, imperfect but sufficient shelter against immediate environmental threats. More significantly, the relationships within these walls create insulation against psychological impacts of material deprivation and social marginalization. The connections between parents and children, siblings with each other, and family unit with surrounding community collectively generate resilience that transcends individual capacity and material circumstance. This, perhaps more than any other factor, explains how rural working-class families sustained themselves through conditions that external observers frequently deemed uninhabitable. The social resources created through interdependence, shared experience, and collective knowledge provided essential compensation for material resources systematically denied through economic and social structures beyond individual control. Sleep deepens as night progresses, bodies surrendering completely to necessary restoration after days' depletion. Dreams may bring temporary escape from physical limitations or simply process days' experiences through subconscious recombination. Regardless, this nightly retreat from conscious struggle provides essential reprieve without which continued function would prove impossible. Outside, stars wheel slowly across the sky in ancient patterns recognized by countless generations before electric illumination diminished their visibility. The moon rises later, casting silver light across the village's humble dwellings and surrounding fields prepared for spring planting. Natural rhythms continue their measured progression regardless of human circumstance, seasons yielding to seasons, darkness to light, winter's deprivation to spring's tentative renewal. Inside the cottage, sleeping bodies generate collective warmth that supplements inadequate bedding, unconsciously drawing closer during night's coldest hours through instinctual seeking of additional heat. This physical interdependence mirrors the waking social interdependence that makes individual survival possible within broader community networks. Dreams occasionally manifest in small physical responses, a child's smile at pleasant imagery, an adult's furrowed brow reflecting concern that penetrates even sleep's protection, a hand reaching unconsciously to confirm another's presence nearby. These moments, though unwitnessed, reveal continuing emotional connections that transcend conscious interaction. Pre-dawn brings subtle shift in sleeping patterns, bodies beginning preparation for waking even before conscious awareness resumes. Breathing patterns change slightly, position adjustments become more frequent, and sensitivity to external stimuli gradually increases. The transition from sleep's complete surrender to waking's renewed vigilance progresses through intermediate stages that balance restoration against survival's constant requirements. First light brings earliest risers to consciousness, typically adults whose responsibilities demand maximum utilization of available daylight. You wake with practiced immediacy, transitioning from sleep to functional awareness without indulgent intermediate stages. Years of necessity have eliminated luxury of gradual waking, creating instead efficient shift between restoration and productivity. The cottage's chill registers immediately, night having leached warmth from the fire's remnants despite careful banking. Your first movement directs toward rekindling rather than personal comfort, reviving essential heat source before attending to individual needs. This prioritization, collective welfare before personal preference, characterizes countless daily decisions within households where resources cannot accommodate all potential requirements. Mary wakes simultaneously through similar conditioning, her movements complementing yours in morning's opening choreography. Fire receives attention from one while water needs occupy other, neither requiring discussion to establish these priorities after years of shared routine. The coordination represents relationships' practical foundation, partnership forged through mutual dependence and sustained through consistent reliability. As dawn gradually illuminates the cottage's interior through its single downstairs window, familiar environment emerges from darkness. The worn furniture, patched walls, carefully arranged possessions that collectively constitute home despite objective inadequacy. Morning light reveals both the poverty of material circumstances and the dignity maintained within them through constant effort. Children wake in succession according to age and responsibility. Emma first to assist with breakfast preparation and younger siblings' needs, William next for school preparation and early chores, others following as household activity gradually increases beyond possibility of continued sleep. Their transitions vary from Mary's immediate functionality to youngest children's reluctant surrender of sleep's comfort. This awakening, utterly ordinary yet remarkably complex in its implications, completes the cycle that defines rural working-class existence in Victorian England. Another night survived despite inadequate shelter and bedding. Another day begun despite persistent uncertainty about its provision. Another opportunity to maintain dignity and connection within circumstances seemingly designed to eliminate both. The cottage that external observers described as nightmarish and unfit for human habitation has once again served its essential purpose, preserving lives through darkness toward another day's possibility. The family deemed wretchedly circumstanced by social commentators has demonstrated resilience that transcends such limited categorical assessment. This morning, like countless others before and after, represents neither victory nor defeat but continuation, the persistent assertion of humanity within dehumanizing conditions, the creation of meaning despite material insufficiency, the maintenance of connection across boundaries of age, gender, and circumstance within shared experience of constraint. As breakfast preparations begin and family members move through familiar morning routines, the patterns established through generations provide structure within which individual lives unfold. These patterns, invisible to casual observers focused primarily on material deficiencies, constitute the actual substance of rural working-class existence beyond statistical categorization or reformist concern. The sun rises fully now, illuminating a village gradually increasing in activity as other households similarly transition from night's suspension to day's demands. Smoke rises from cottage chimneys, paths fill with workers heading toward fields and workplaces. Children gather for school when weather and health permit attendance. The collective routine resumes its measured progression through seasons, years, and generations. Within your cottage, the family shares simple breakfast before dispersing toward respective responsibilities: field labour for you, household management for Mary, school for some children, domestic assistance for others according to age and ability. The separation occurs without particular ceremony, but carries implicit understanding of interdependence that makes individual activities collectively meaningful. This moment, family temporarily united before day's necessary scattering, represents the core around which all other aspects of rural working-class life revolve. The relationships sustained despite material deprivation and structural constraint provide essential context within which hardship becomes endurable rather than merely crushing. The connections between individuals transform mere survival into something approaching meaningful existence, despite external conditions designed to permit only the former. As you depart toward another day's labour, the cottage recedes physically but remains psychologically present, the anchor point for identity and belonging beyond economic function or social classification. Despite its objective inadequacy by contemporary or modern standards, it has served its most essential purpose, sheltering not just bodies but relationships necessary for sustainable existence within profoundly challenging circumstances. This story, reconstructed from fragments of historical record, first-hand accounts and physical evidence, represents reality experienced by millions whose lives received minimal documentation beyond statistical compilation or reformist observation. Their existence, though marginalized within official narratives of Victorian progress and prosperity, constituted the essential foundation upon which more visible achievements necessarily rested. The rural working class of Victorian England inhabited conditions that modern observers would consider unacceptable by any reasonable standard. Their cottages were indeed often damp, structurally unsound, overcrowded and unsanitary. Their diets were nutritionally inadequate, monotonous, and perpetually insufficient. Their access to medical care, education, and basic social services was minimal or non-existent. Their labour was physically devastating, economically undervalued, and perpetually insecure. Yet within these constraints, they created communities characterised by remarkable resilience, practical knowledge, and meaningful connection. They developed sophisticated strategies for maximising limited resources, maintaining health despite inadequate conditions, and preserving dignity within circumstances that threatened its elimination. They established networks of mutual support that compensated partially for institutional neglect, creating informal welfare systems based on reciprocity rather than charity. Most significantly, they maintained essential humanity despite conditions that might reasonably have extinguished it, raising children with identifiable values beyond mere survival, sustaining cultural practices that provided meaning and pleasure within material deprivation, and developing identities not entirely defined by economic function or social classification. This achievement, living rather than merely surviving within profoundly challenging circumstances, represents historical legacy worthy of acknowledgement beyond patronizing pity or romantic idealization. The rural working class of Victorian England demonstrated human capacity for adaptation, connection, and meaning creation within constraints that modern observers might reasonably consider unsurvivable. Their story continues resonating across historical distance, not because their suffering was exceptional or their resilience particularly heroic, but because their experience illuminates fundamental human questions about what constitutes acceptable minimum conditions for dignified existence. How communities sustain themselves despite institutional neglect, and what truly proves essential when material resources reach extreme limitation. As you rest in your comfortable bed tonight, perhaps these distant lives might prompt reflection on what aspects of existence prove truly necessary for meaningful human experience, and how contemporary understandings of minimum acceptable standards might appear to future observers looking back from their own historical vantage point. Sleep well, knowing that your ancestors, whether direct biological predecessors or simply those who occupied your geographical location in previous generations,